in this area because there's just a demand for so much capital at the moment and so much credit that we can all make out quite well out of this. And, you know, it's kind of a new gold rush, as it were.
Did that message land? Like, are they all on the same page about that?
I think the fact we got hold of the details suggests perhaps not. And again, the competition seems to be there in terms of the pricing of the loans for the construction of data centers, which are very competitively priced at the moment.
And is this equity financing, debt financing, both, all of the above, public, private? What kind of capital is being raised?
It's pretty much everything. So, you know, a lot of people wouldn't get involved in data centers until such time as they're built. So particularly for the pre-construction works where you're adding the power and stuff, that's very much equity driven at the moment. And then the debt comes in for construction of these data centers, but also for the power and the utilities that are needed to service them as well. And that's coming from a mix of public and private sources.
So this is a totally unfair question. Who do you think is going to win? Like, if they're not all happy-go-lucky, let's work together and there's enough pie for everybody, who's in the lead in this right now?
I think there will be enough pie for everyone. Maybe I'm being naive, Alex, by saying that, but I actually think this is going to be a big driver of credit markets in particular going forward. These bankers have suffered from, you know, private equities difficulties, meaning there's been less leveraged loans around. That's got to change because these of the checks that need to be written for these. It will also drive a bigger resuscitation in the securitization markets. They've been quite good in the US, but they've been moribund in Europe. So, you know, overall, this should be a very, very positive thing for both banks and private credit.
Will there be some IPOs?
Yeah, as long as it works. That should be the qualifier. As long as it works. Exactly. There is a chance these things are not going to work, and banks are kind of trying to protect themselves by they're giving lower leverage for data centers that are AI focused, and they're charging more for them as well. So that's their attempt to protect themselves if AI doesn't come through in the way people hope.
Well, that's kind of where I wanted to go, Neil, because there's some folks saying, are we really going to get the return on investment, we being these companies that are making these big capital expenditures? And as equity investors, are we going to get the returns from all this spending? So there's a note of caution that's been kind of coming into the AI story a little bit. Are the banks thinking about that as well?
Yeah, 100%. It's something that's definitely on their minds. And one of the ways they protect themselves is those kind of higher returns that they're demanding from AI-focused data centers. Because the risk is if these things don't work out, you're left with an obsolete asset. So you definitely need some downside protection there. There's also been cases of some of these data centers that have been built and can't get connections. So there's already talk of what people are calling zombie data centers. And one of the ways investors can protect themselves against those risks is to actually do the plumbing instead. And we have some stuff about people advising that the utilities and the power providers may be a better way of playing this game rather than investing directly into data centers themselves.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up too. Is not just the building of the data center, but especially when you have, say, you know, the report from the information on NVIDIA saying that it's just really hot and it's too hot, and that's why sort of we may see some delays in chips, aka you need air conditioning, you need power, etc. Is there one company that's making a bigger bet on one area of AI versus the other?
I don't think so at this stage, but the difficulty, I mean, well, you could probably cite some of the power companies in Virginia because Virginia is the kind of capital of data centers globally. You know, the scale of power that's needed for these things is the equivalent, just in the US, is the equivalent of 3 New York cities.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
That is just huge amount of power. So utilities, particularly around Richmond, which is, as I say, the kind of capital of these things, they're probably the ones who are taking the biggest risk. But one way that people are looking to mitigate that is they're talking about building small nuclear reactors next to these power centers, next to these data centers to provide the power for them. Because basically what we don't want to happen is for consumers to end up paying higher energy prices in order for people to be able to play on Instagram more than they normally would before.
All right, Neil, thanks so much for joining us. Neil Callanan, he's the senior editor for Bloomberg News, joining us from London via Zoom about, again, the AI is the story for the last couple of years in this economy. I'm not really sure what it is. To me, it's just big data. To me, it's just the next step in the digitalization of everything in our lives. But the AI moniker has been backed up by a lot of spending by these companies.
Yeah, but like you said, you got to deliver the returns on that. So we have a story out right now, Paul, that says that some of President-elect Donald Trump's key advisors are signaling support now for Kevin Warsh, a former Fed Reserve governor, to be the next Treasury Secretary. This is after reporting over the weekend about infighting into who should take that top helm of Treasury Secretary. This is Bloomberg Intelligence.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Monday, everybody. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from our Interactive Broker Studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. So how would you feel, how would we feel if all of a sudden we had to reapply for the jobs that we currently have?
Yeah, that's not cool, but I've heard about it before, particularly when you're merging two entities together. That's kind of one of the ways you did it. Having been through several mergers on Wall Street, it's just who makes more money, me or my competitor to the other firm?
Right.
So it's pretty easy. Or who's ranked higher? But.
You had to wonder like what that's like in the office or in bathroom talk when that happens. So this is basically happening over at HSBC. So we want to get more details here on Tomasz Netzel, Senior European Banks Analyst. And this is on the reporting that this HSBC has asked hundreds of managers to reapply for jobs in the firm's newly formed corporate and institutional banking division as the CEO continues to look for ways to make the bank run more efficiently. Tomasz, is this kind of normal, or does this stand out to you in any way?
Yes, good afternoon. Well, it's not nothing unusual, right? As Paul mentioned before, right? They are merging two entities. There will be some job cuts. They would have to cut. They would have to extract sort of synergies from those two entities to make sure to justify the move. And it is something that has already been floated before by HSBC. The new CEO is definitely looking to complete the journey of HSBC in terms of improving efficiency, and cutting jobs is something that they've been floated. Senior jobs are at risk, that's what we know. But again, we don't know how many people will be fired. We don't know what cost savings will come out of this. Everything is just is still in the air, and we're going to learn more only in February when they report 4Q reports, and the new CEO will outline his plan for HSBC in 2025 and 2026.
Tomasz, give us a sense of kind of where HSBC, Hong Kong, and Shanghai Banking Corporation, kind of how does it rank as a global bank these days in terms of size and market share and all that kind of stuff?
Yes, so look at HSBC right now. Of course, it's a global player, making lots of money, facilitating trade between economies globally, making lots of money on cross-border payments, and now they're moving very massively into wealth management business because they are looking to shield themselves from declining interest rates. So it's a massive bank, more than 100 billion market cap. Of course, doesn't compare it's not as big as some US players, but it's trying to find its way to strengthen its position globally. Hence, they are trying to separate the units, the Asia unit. They want to separate it from the rest of the business. It is all because the West and East divide. They want to make sure that these businesses are resilient from each other. We're going to have UK entity as well, separated from the rest of the group. So they're trying hard. They try to in terms of investment banking, they're not as strong as some other players. So I think definitely where they're going to be focusing on is the wealth management, because where they have a competitive advantage over the other peers in Asia. And this is good business, profitable business, and business with a very, very, very interesting growth trajectory. And so definitely that's the area of the focus.
Right. So from what I understand, they'll have an Eastern regional unit, including Asia Pacific and the Middle East, right? And then a Western market that includes its non-ring-fenced bank in the UK, Europe, and Americas, and then the UK and Hong Kong will be standalone units. Is that basically correct? And then how do you value a company that has all of those different strings at this point?
I don't know. I think they will make our job a little bit easier if they do this sort of divide, I believe, because it will be easier to find peer group and compare Asian peers against Asian focus HSBC, I believe. The same will be with the investment bank unit, which is just based on Western markets. So I think it may be a little bit easier to try to extract the values for this bank. But as I say, it's not going to be easy, I think, right? The streamlining, this is going to be very complex. There's lots of overlapping jobs. There's lots of jobs that will have to be eliminated. Maybe some will be created. And how it's going to work out, I think it's still something, thing in the air. And hopefully it will boost productivity and improve efficiency. But it's definitely sort of an experiment for HSBC, because they've never gone through such a divide in the business. Now we have had a Ping An a couple of years ago trying to get HSBC divide and separate the Asian business. Of course, they are not doing this to satisfy Ping An. Of course, this is a totally different reason. But they try to I think showcase different values of their business, and make sure that the Asia business and wealth management business is seen as a separate entity, easier to value, and it's creating and adding lots of value to the business.
So what's the view of management here? Because does the street trust management to execute here?
Well, if you look at share price performance, HSBC is kind of lagging behind the other European peers or Asian peers or Standard Chartered, who had a good story in terms of improving growth, efficiency, and boosting wealth management. New CEO still has to deliver, of course. One is, of course, improving efficiency. One is boosting its wealth management business, productivity, improve operating, etc. But let's remember as well, we have the landscape is changing, right? We have new administration coming in the US. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with the interest rates. High interest rates for longer is good for HSBC, but we as well don't know what's going to happen with the tariffs, with new administration putting higher tariffs, how it will impact trade. And let's put it this way, right? HSBC is making lots of money in Asia, facilitating trade between West and East, and what will be the implication on their business? I think that's something analysts are trying to understand right now. So of cost is something that are in control.
All right, Tomasz, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Tomasz Netzel, Senior European Banks Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us. from our Bloomberg HQ in London. Coming up in the top of the hour, we're going to get the latest on these markets with Abigail Doolittle, markets correspondent. David Gurr, he's down in Rio to G20. We'll get the latest reporting from there. And then we're going to check in with Ira Jersey, Bloomberg interest rate intelligence chief U.S. interest rate strategist here, get his thoughts about what the government bond market is thinking about a Trump presidency coming up. What's being priced into this market? What are the inflation expectations embedded in that market? So we'll check in. We got a lot of folks coming up in the next hour. Stay tuned. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Monday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from Interactive Broker Studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. We have a jam-packed hour for you lined up. We're going to start with David Gurra. He is down in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. His take on what's happening at the G20, plus Ira Jersey from Bloomberg Intelligence will be talking about that. Back end of the curve, 4.5%. I was gone for a month and a half, and I missed 4.5% on the 10-year. Plus, we'll get a market take with Carol Schleif, Chief Investment Officer at BMO Family Office, and Steve Mann, a Bloomberg Intelligence Global Autos and Industrials Research Manager, joining us on potentially easing rules under a Trump administration for self-driving cars. We'll break that down for you in the next hour. But let's kick it all off for you with the Bloomberg Business Flash. For that, we go to Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much, Alex Steele. Big warm welcome back. We have got the Dow lower, the S&P, NASDAQ. They are both advancing. Right to the numbers here. We got a rebound after last week's round. 2% drop, by the way, last week on the S&P. Today up 25 at 58.95. That is a gain right now of 0.4%. The Dow down 5, lower little changed. S&P, to put it all in context, up 25, up by about 0.4%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up by 0.7%. 10-year 4.45%. The 2-year this Monday morning 4.31%. Gold is surging $51 the ounce to $26.14, up by 2%. West Texas Intermediate crude back above 68.85 a barrel, up 2.7%, and Bitcoin above 92,568 on Bitcoin, a gain right now of 3.8%. As for the interest rate backdrop and the outlook for the 10-year, Phil Orlando is chief equity market strategist at Federated Hermes, and he was a guest right here on Bloomberg Intelligence.
We were at 350, 360 or so a couple of months ago. You know, we're now up in that 440, 450 neighborhood. And then the question is whether or not we're going to go back and retest, you know, the 475 or 5% level we saw, October of last year.
And you can hear more of the conversation with Phil Orlando on the Intelligence Podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. And indeed, with Alex back, we have got the 10-year 4.45%. Some of the other stories that we're keeping an eye on. The big move today in MicroStrategy. It is adding to its cache of Bitcoin. MicroStrategy up by 8.7%. It said it bought about 51,780 Bitcoin for around $4.6 billion, the largest purchase by the crypto hedge fund proxy since it began acquiring the digital asset more than 4 years ago. Again, worth repeating, MicroStrategy now up by 8.7%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so very much. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. Let's get some more here on the individual stocks. I'm told NVIDIA reports on Wednesday.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, let's go to Abigail Doolittle, Bloomberg News Chief Markets Correspondent. For some of the individual stocks, what are you watching on an individual level?
Well, certainly that NVIDIA down 1.4% and close to this year's highs. The highs closer to 150, so off of it a little bit, but lots of pressure in terms of the numbers. Will they produce the perfection that they've been come to people expect them to produce. And last hour I was talking a little bit about the decelerating growth there. If we pull up the FA function, NVIDIA FA function, and turn it to quarters, we are looking for sales of just above $33.2 billion. Very healthy, 83.3% year-over-year growth. However, that's down from 122% growth, down from 262% growth, and so on and so forth. And on the bottom line, it's even more dramatic in terms of the declining growth. So at some point, the street's going to pay attention to this, especially if they don't hit the numbers, which they have not at all done. They've put up fantastic quarter after fantastic quarter and guide. So certainly watching that one. On the other hand, SMCI, Supermicro Computer, it had been in the top. Yes, it is. So from a percentage standpoint, still up 12.9%, a bit of a relief rally on a stock that was down more than 80% or around 80% from its all-time high, which is extraordinary given the fact that the rally into its listing on the S&P 500, if I recall, it was about 1,200% or something along those lines. Their AI components, but of course the company, from a financial standpoint, the management not quite as strong. I've talked to Woo Jin Ho quite a bit about this, and he was basically saying they were a small company, and then all of a sudden became, right in the spotlight, and some of the controls didn't become as strong. Well, today is the day for them to either file that delayed 10K or to file paperwork with the NASDAQ to keep their listing. Why there's a relief rally on that without the news, I'm not quite sure, but it's just been down so much.
Or somebody knows something.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. That's an excellent point.
I don't know. That's a little suspicious trading, but an interesting game nonetheless, because that was one of the darling AI stocks.
Yes.
For a while, people were looking for what's the next NVIDIA? Where do I go? Where do I go? They went to that stock, which I never even heard of. But then it's so shocking to see what's happened with their accounting issues.
Well, isn't that just when you go from like a small cap to a big cap?
I guess.
Like you get different analysts, you get your more scrutiny.
Yeah, more scrutiny,
Yep.
higher quality scrutiny.
Yep.
So, yes.
Interesting story. Okay. Anything else out there?
Tesla stands out. I mean, up 8%. The Trump trade alive and well there on the Bloomberg scoop, of course, that the Trump administration, the transition team is saying that they are considering easing self-driving rules, but basically just rules, period. That there's going to be a structure to legitimize these self-driving cars, the robo-taxis. And I know, Alex, you and I, or I believe that you and I, weeks and weeks ago had speculated on the idea that the reason Elon Musk took such an avid interest in President-elect Trump's campaign is for this deregulation possibility. So let's now see whether or not it's going to come to be. The revenue and the earnings from that robo-taxi is many years out.
Yeah.
But when it comes, it could be significant, especially if they're able to actually do it.
I love that idea, though. It's like, hey, we're not actually going to extend those tax credits for EVs, but we're definitely going to look into self-driving. Right. It's like, okay, all right. Chicken, egg, the whole thing. All right, thanks so much, Abigail Doolittle, joining us. Bloomberg News Chief Markets correspondent joining us there. All right, let's head down now to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. It's a beautiful shot. Our David Gura, a correspondent for Bloomberg and host of the Big Take podcast, is joining us on the G20. David, what do we expect out of the communique that's currently being written as we speak?
So there'll be kind of broad strokes agreement on what priorities to pursue when it comes to sort of climate change, environmental issues, developing finance, for instance. But then we're supposed to see sort of more meat on the bone when it comes to conflicts around the world. So we talked previously just about the conflict in Ukraine, the conflicts in the Middle East. That will be addressed in some fashion in this document. I think that's the thing that we're going to pay the closest attention to, is how much specific these countries get into when it comes to that. Because the odd facet of the G20 when you compare it to other kind of multilateral institutions is these aren't all allies. These are countries that are in many cases adversarial. For instance, we have this photo op coming up here, this class photo with all of the leaders who are here. Jockey to see who stands next to Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is a tricky dance indeed. So bearing that in mind, when you come up to drafting this communique, there are a lot of people who have different perspectives on any number of issues, including these global conflicts. And so it'll be interesting to see sort of how they're addressed, if at all, in that final document.
Hey, David, at these G20 events, who kind of drives the bus here in terms of agenda, I don't know, discussions? Is it the U.S. president? Is it the host country? How does that typically work?
It's a great question. So this gathering was born out of the financial crisis in 2008, so it had a very strong economic focus, and it was something that we saw Larry Summers, then the Treasury Secretary, really advocate for. that has now sort of shifted so that each place where these conferences are being held does have some say in sort of what the priorities are. But we're here focused on these 2 days of very intense meetings, both those that are on the program and those that are taking place on the sidelines. But really, there's been a string of meetings leading up to this. There was a meeting of finance ministers a couple of months ago where they continued to chip away on some of these issues and work on them. So it's not as though everyone is sitting around the table writing this communique here today in person, Paul. It's something that's been kind of workshopped and worked on over many meetings that have led up to this. And Brazil, being the host country this year, has been the host to a lot of those meetings going into this. Next year, South Africa will be the president of the G20. It'll shift over there, and we're kind of listening to hear what focus it might take from the president of South Africa, who's due to speak tomorrow as well. But I would say it was something that was born of the U.S. It's something the U.S. really advocated for with Canada. It's gotten much broader, and now each country where the summit is hosted has some say in sort of the flavor or focus of each of these summits.
All right, David, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gurr, he's a correspondent for Bloomberg. He's the host of the Big Take podcast. He is reporting to us from Rio de Janeiro down there, the G20 meeting. Tough duty, of course, but David handling with aplomb, as he usually does. All right, folks, what would you like to hear about on Bloomberg Radio? Hell, make shows like ours even better by taking our Bloomberg Audience Survey. Visit youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast and click the link in our profile or the community section to take the survey, which is hosted by our partners over at Material. Fill it out now at youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast. In all this reporting about the new administration and the Treasury pick, I've heard the number bandied about that the U.S. Treasury market is $28 trillion in size.
It's large,
so
let's say.
That means I have to be a little bit nicer to our next guest than I typically am. Ira Jersey joins us. I didn't know he was so influential, $28 trillion. Ira, do you care, or to what extent does your market care about who President-elect Trump selects as Secretary of the Treasury?
Well, so people have been talking about who it's going to be, and there's a mantra at the Treasury Department that typically is they want to be regular and predictable in terms of how they issue debt. So if you wind up with any of the three main picks that we've been hearing about, I don't suspect that you'll see a major seed change from that, but they do influence how many of which securities are issued. In fact, when the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee, that's a committee of investors and dealers and the like, when they get together, they actually send a recommendation to the Treasury Secretary of how things should be issued. Now, in reality, the Treasury Secretary kind of signs off on it, but it's mostly the decisions are made by the people under the Treasury Secretary. But I think that all three of these picks are reasonably middle of the road in terms of how they're going to operate the Treasury Department, in my opinion. And look, I haven't had any discussions with any of these folks, but I don't think that they're really outside of the realm of what we might expect as normal, especially since two of them are very much markets people, and they don't want to rock the boat. They'll get feedback from markets and market participants and investors before they make any sweeping changes to how treasuries are issued, which treasuries are issued, and the like.
T-back, that's what the cool kids call it. Ira, it's good to chat with you. So I was out of commission for about a month and a half, and when that happened, we're looking at Treasury yields around like 3.6%. It was like, all right, guys, we're going to move money out of Treasuries and we're going to put it into stocks. That's where the return's going to be. And then I come into the office and we're close to 4.5. That's a big shift. How high do we stay for how long? And is that thesis then, look, guys, you still got to put money in the long end?
Well, so I do think that there's a cap on how high Treasury yields are going to be able to go. There's going to be kind of this supply-demand balance that probably is somewhere between 4.5% and 5%, particularly in long-term Treasuries, just because the higher yields go from here, the more we get into the place where liability managers tend to really like bond yields, and especially unless you get a really big shift up in inflation, there's no reason to think that we won't stabilize somewhere in this area. So our view is we'll wind up staying in a pretty wide range over the next year, smaller range than we had the past year. Remember, over the past year, we've been between 5% and 3.5%, right? So 150 basis point range. I think it's probably a bit narrower than that over the next year, but we still wind up being volatile in that range. More important is going to be as important is going to be the curve, I think, and where do two-year yields go, which is far less certain because we don't know how far the Fed's going to cut, right? the Fed's probably going to cut at least a little bit more, but are they only going to cut another 75 basis points as the market expects, or are they going to cut another 150 to 200 basis points like we thought just when, before you went out on break? Because that's really been the big move, and the reason why we've seen this massive sell-off in treasuries is just a shifting expectation for what the Fed's going to do.
So what will we get at the December 18th meeting is, I guess I've heard the word skip used. It's the first time I've heard that, but is skipping the December meeting in terms of rate cuts, is that reasonable, or do you think they're going to move forward?
Yeah, Paul, I do think that there is the big distinct possibility that they skip in December. You heard some language out of Chair Powell over the last week that basically hinted that they might do that. So you wind up getting an okay payroll report, an okay CPI report, and you wind up with maybe a skip. The market right now, keep in mind, is basically pricing a skip in either December or January. So basically one cut between the two meetings, kind of unsure which one is of those two meetings is going to be the skip.
What's interesting, though, is that it feels like we priced out a lot of the drama and the rate cuts that we had already priced in, say, over the summer. So are we sort of at neutral, in essence, in terms of what the market actually expects versus what the Fed's actually going to deliver?
Well, the market seems to think that maybe if the Fed's going to get back to neutral, that maybe the neutral rate is 3 3/4 to 4%, because that's what the market's priced for where the Fed's going to get to. So again, a little bit more in terms of cuts, but not down to 2.75% where we were priced very briefly for a cup of coffee back in September. So so I do think that the market believes that neutral is higher. I think the Fed is skeptical of that, right? Which is the reason why the Fed, I think, thinks that they might need to remain restrictive a little bit longer, and they do think that they're restrictive, right? Almost every single member of the Fed has said that they're restrictive. But the question is how restrictive, and will the Fed, when they get to restrictive, how long then will they stay there? And that's one reason why you have 2-year yields that kind of can't make up their mind whether or not they want to be at 4% or 4.25%. And I suspect that 2-year yields will wind up back at 4, or even under 4% by the end of next year. But there's still, that's incremental tightening or easing by the Federal Reserve over the course of that period of time. And unless we get a recession, it's hard to see how the yield curve significantly steepens from here, unless you wind up with some kind of deficit shock where the Treasury Department has to go out and issue a whole lot of long-term debt. It's possible, but that I think is kind of an edge case scenario.
All right, Ira, thank you so much. As always, appreciate it. Ira Jersey, Chief U.S. Interest Rate Strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us from the BI headquarters down there in Princeton, New Jersey. Again, the 2-year Treasury is at 4.3%, the 10-year 4.4%. I'm not refinancing my mortgage anytime soon.
No,
it's kind of the takeaway.
I'm sorry.
It's kind of the takeaway there.
There was like a week there a little while ago where you thought you could at some point in the near future, and that ship has definitely sailed for you.
I'm looking at the 30-year fixed, 6.86%. Mortgage Bankers Association, 30-year fixed mortgage rate, 6.86%. So kind of almost retesting some of that recent highs we had seen. So not bueno for those folks.
No, I was also reading an article about how with the equity rally, and I appreciate that we sold off on Friday, but with the equity rally over the last few weeks, it's hard to get clients to diversify into anything else because you don't want to miss it. But it's like, hey, you're sitting on a 10-year at almost 4.5% in terms of diversification.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're trying to get the people that $7 trillion of cash that's presumably in money markets and other
that keeps building.
That keeps building. And how do you get, if you're a financial advisor, how do you get folks to get out of that and get into the stock market? We're gonna have a lot more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
And I just don't know how he covers the ground he does. He's willing to work. I mean, and I couldn't get as much done anyway. You know, what I could do in a couple of hours, you know, may take 8 hours now. I just don't read as fast and different things. But it's working very well. And this place, if anything happened to me, it would be working extremely well the next day. I don't get any phone calls. It can actually, we can rig something up so we got some answering machine that people think I'm still around, you know, or something.
And why specifically have you invested Burlington Northern instead of buying a capital-efficient company like American Express?
You're killing me, Daphne.
I'm certainly glad she's not 9 years old.
Yeah. What is unusual about Berkshire is that a very significant number of Berkshire shareholders located all over the United States, not just in Omaha, but the number of different Berkshire holders who have contributed $100 million or more to their local charities, usually with people not knowing about it, I think is many multiples of any other public company in the country. It's not, they're not more multiples than you know, Bill's put a whole lot into philanthropy and I don't know the details of the family, but clearly there's a huge sum of money that the Walmart family, I'm sure, has done all kinds of things philanthropic and will continue to do it. But I don't think you'll find any company where a group of shareholders who aren't related to each other, so many of them have done something along the lines of what Ruth did a few weeks ago, just to exchange a little piece of paper that they've held for 5 decades, and they
was one of the most likely outcomes, and we didn't have high probabilities on any of them, if you will. It's not like it was run away, but you know, it is interesting because you are trying to make sure that you're watching what the 10-year is doing and what treasuries are doing. So if anything, we've probably backed off a little bit on duration, and we had been underweight on the duration side anyway, and we had leaned into growth and into the United States and North American securities anyway. So we feel pretty good about the positioning and trying to be very adaptive in watching as things go forward.
You know, it appeared that the gridlock scenario was a scenario that would work well for markets, but I'm not sure we're going to have a gridlock Congress and executive branch. It looks like it's going to be a clear sweep for the Republicans, and maybe they can get a lot of stuff done here. How do you position for that?
Well, the interesting thing is I think if you go back and you listen to the way when Chairman Powell was asked at the last FOMC conference call how they were going to adapt to the changes, and they said, look, until policy is there, we can't really start trying to model for it. And I think that's one of the approaches to take, because the market's trying to in advance discount which way things are going to swing. But come late January, depending on if we get across the board tariffs in the first week or two of a Trump administration, that's one potential policy response with portfolios, as opposed to a more gradual response or using tariffs as a negotiating tactic and an opening bid. So to pre-position portfolios is probably a little premature, if you will, but keeping adept at watching the way those things play out will be important. But it is ironic because historically markets have preferred gridlock, I think under the assumptions that if the legislators are all off bickering with each other, markets can get on with being markets. But clearly this time around, I think it was both not having to wait for the election outcome and having a decisive sort of tilt to it. The presumption is then, okay, fine, we'll get policy quickly, and then we'll be able to adapt and adjust. And so that unknown period shrunk from being what could have been months and months to being basically just a matter of weeks.
Something that's really stood out to me in the last few weeks is the outperformance of financials. Do you think that that continues?
We do, and one of the things that's interesting is when you start digging into the stats and looking at how low the level of initial public offerings and M&A is. I saw one statistic recently that said something like 27,000 companies are sitting in venture capital portfolios. Over half of them have been there for over 4 years. So you've got a lot of really high quality potential companies that just haven't come public. You have a lot of M&A that hasn't happened, and that's teed up. I think that's one of the primary reasons why you're seeing Wall Street get pretty excited, both, and we hear anecdotally there's a lot of bankers out there teeing up deals, and so that could be positive for the industry.
All right, Carol, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. Carol Schleif joining us there over at BMO Family Office. She's CIO over at that shop. Thank you so very much. All right, let's go to Steve Mann now, Bloomberg Intelligence Global Autos and Industrial Research Manager. We were talking about Tesla earlier and how potentially the new Trump administration might loosen some regulation on self-driving cars. Now, this comes, though, as maybe EV subsidies will be rolled back, which is a bit of a head-scratcher for me. Steve Mann joins us now. Hey, Steve, what do you make of the fact that maybe those fully self-driving vehicles is a now hallmark or priority for the incoming transportation department?
Yeah, I think it's important. Full self-driving vehicles, it's the next kind of technology evolution for cars. And one of the biggest hurdles, really, in the U.S. is regulations. There's only 2 states that allow, self-driving cars, meaning without steering wheel and pedals on the road today, is California and Texas. But nationally, the other states or the National Highway Safety Board actually do not allow these steering wheel-less and pedal-less vehicles on the road. So it's a huge evolution if they allow that.
So Elon Musk certainly having an influence there on this, presumably on this policy direction here, and Tesla stock is up 7.2% today. Steve, how likely is the federal government to kind of maybe follow California and Texas and allow these on the road?
Well, first of all, Tesla is not going to be the only one benefiting from it. GM could benefit from it. Waymo could benefit from it. Actually, GM's Cruise division has actually lobbied the National Highway Safety Board to really push rules and regulations, relax those regulations to allow unsupervised vehicles, more unsupervised vehicles on the road. But that's been held up for the last 2-3 years. And I mean, personally, I think it's really important for the government to actually relax that regulation. It's not just the U.S. trying to develop this technology. There's a lot of companies in China. There's a lot of companies in Europe that are trying to develop this kind of driverless technology. And I think, U.S. needs to do this to compete.
When you say that they need to do it to compete, wouldn't it be the same with EVs? And I'm wondering from maybe Elon Musk's point of view, if Tesla is able to sort of make a lot of inroads with the robo-taxis and self-driving cars, that in essence will also help prop up EVs because, oh, by the way, those cars will be electric.
Oh, that's very true. Those self-driving software is propulsion or powertrain agnostic, but having an EV really helps push that into the evolution into the future, because they do work better on EVs than gasoline cars.
So, Steve, just give us a sense of these self-driving vehicles. Where is the technology today? And when do you think it'll get to the point where
Paul's going to use one? Which,
yes,
by the way,
exactly.
Let me tell you, it's going to be a while.
It's going to be a while. Where are we?
I mean, you know, we still think it's going to take a while. Like when we look at, you know, full autonomous vehicles as a main driver to Tesla's revenue, we don't really model that out until like 2035. So it's going to be a while because it's really reliant on the AI technology, and specifically for Tesla, it's really using a lot of the data that it's collecting from its cameras in all the vehicles that are out there, and teaching the machine how to react and respond appropriately in various situations. As you know, as both of you drive on the road, there's there's umpteen number of scenarios that could happen. So it will take a while for the machine to really learn and be proficient at driving as well as a human being.
What else do you make of now if we just switch focus to just the EV part of Tesla or other companies, if that subsidy winds up going away for EVs, what do you think happens to the likes of like Rivian and Tesla and even the EV parts of major automakers?
Well, I think, you know, the initial thought for us is really it could be beneficial to companies like Tesla and Rivian. You know, if the credit goes away, I think EVs will still be around. There's still going to be some buyers who are really interested in driving EVs. Will it get past the 8% penetration rate, or will it drop down a little bit below 8? It could. But what that means is it's going to weed out a lot of competition. The unprofitable EV makers will have to probably exit the market. That will leave companies like Tesla, who's profitable. And the reason I bring up Rivian is because they have a huge backing from Volkswagen right now to really fund their next affordable vehicle.
So when I look at the Fords, the GMs of the world, what's their level of commitment to the electric vehicle business? Steve, has it changed in the last several years, or is it still there?
It hasn't for GM, and that's a good point, Paul, because I think the Trump administration will have to actually take that into consideration. You know, with the Inflation Reduction Act, over $100 billion has been spent on kind of onshoring the EV supply chain, and for these companies to actually give that up and convert that to a sunk cost, it's not going to go very well with the car makers. So, you know, for GM, they've invested a lot. You know, they're rolling out cheaper and cheaper EVs. Next year, you're going to launch the Bolt, which is Chevrolet Bolt, which is under $30,000. But Ford, on the other hand, is quite different. They actually have retrenched. They delayed the battery, the new battery plant, and then they're also cutting back on a three-row EV SUV. But so, depending on the different automakers, the different approaches, yeah.
All right, Steve. As always, thank you very much. Steve Mann, Global Autos and Industrials analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. He's down there in our Princeton office. Again, it seems like the presence of Elon Musk is certainly influencing some of the transportation policy that may be coming down the pipe.
Would you be more apt to buy an EV or a self-driving car?
EV.
Okay.
Yes. But, I think about it. Every morning I get in a car with some dude I've never met before. What's kind of the difference?
Between self-driving and that? No,
Yeah,
it's a good point. I mean, at least when it comes to, say, transportation, like cabs and taxis.
Yes.
Would you get into a self-driving taxi?
I don't know.
No, he's not there yet.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would.
I don't know. We'll have
I don't
to
know.
see. All right.
When John Tucker does, that's when
Yes.
things change. All right, coming up, we're going to talk about oil under Trump 2.0.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks getting a boost from Tesla. Tesla shares, they are trading higher by 6.9%. Market is rebounding after last week's slide as the rout in treasuries abated after 10-year yields approached the 4.5% mark. Traders also keeping a close eye on news around President-elect Donald Trump's administration. The S&P back above 5,900, 5,906 now, up 35, a gain of 0.6%. The Dow, which had been swinging between gains and losses, up 55, up 0.1%, while NASDAQ up 176, a gain of 1%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up 0.8%. 10-year at 4.44%, the 2-year 4.31%. Gold up $47 the ounce, up 1.8%. West Texas Intermediate crude surging 3% above $69 a barrel, and Bitcoin today up 3.2%. Almost at 92,000. Swaps contracts assign odds of about 55% to the likelihood of a 0.25 percentage point reduction by the Federal Reserve next month, and several Wall Street economists have dialed back their forecasts for 2025 cuts. Former St. Louis Fed President Jim Bullard says the Fed is in good shape for next month's meeting.
If it was me, I think they could make one more move here in December, and then that would put them at 4 3/8. And then there'll be a debate about where neutral is. But if you thought the median of the committee thinks neutral is maybe 3%, then you have to have maybe 100 basis points on top of that, because, or 125 even, because inflation isn't all the way back down to target.
Jim Bullard, now the Dean of the Purdue Business School. You can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast, and you can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Confidence among U.S. home builders advanced to a 7-month high in November on a jump in sales expectations and optimism a Trump administration will ease regulatory burdens. Again, recapping, S&P at 5,906, up 0.6%, with the 10-year 4.44%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thanks so much, Charlie Pellet. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, where am I doing? Business, economics, and finance.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Boom.
You know, it's like riding a bike until you hit a speed bump all across the world. We also will have to tap into our Bloomberg NEF folks. So Bloomberg NEF research basically powers data sets and models for everything from commodities to power, transport, industry, buildings, ag sectors. It's all about businesses helping to finance the energy transition. ... What does a Trump 2.0 mean for something called the energy transition? Joining us now is Derek Flakel, Bloomberg NEF lead U.S. policy analyst. What do we think a Trump 2.0 and energy means?
So first of all, there's a lot of worries about the future of the Inflation Reduction Act, the U.S.'s signature climate subsidy program. We expect that will mostly remain intact. A lot of Republican districts and states are benefiting. 14 House Republicans have signed a letter saying they don't want to see those tax credits repealed hastily, and the Speaker of the House has said that he wants to use a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. So we think a lot of that will survive. Where you're likely to see more change is regulations and some voluntary initiatives like the procurement for clean products from the federal government.
So I'm just looking, you have a great chart graphic here. Fossil fuels are likely to fare well under a Trump administration. Electric vehicles are not. Wouldn't Mr. Musk have something to say about the fate of electric vehicles?
He certainly would, but the question is, what is Tesla's strategy going to be vis-a-vis other electric vehicle producers? Most of the valuation comes from the dream of a robo-taxi, and we've certainly seen some Bloomberg reporting recently saying that Musk is likely to push for a favorable framework on AVs. When it comes to EVs or electric vehicles, you know, he has said, and the business analysis may or may not bear this out, that Tesla would do better sort of survive the loss of the EV tax credits in a way that some of his EV competitors might not. It ultimately depends on what you and what he thinks Tesla's interest is, whether it's dominating a smaller EV market or having a smaller share of a larger EV market.
Let's move to some of the stuff that feels a little bit dicier, and those are the tax credits that are part of the IRA. So one is a tax credit for carbon that's captured. How you store it and how you capture it is debatable in terms of how much tax credit you receive, and the other has to do with hydrogen. How do we feel about those two policies either staying in place or getting reduced?
So these tax credits are favored by, industrial interests, oil and gas interests. From what I've heard, there's not a lot of Republican appetite to repeal either of those. What you're likely to see is looser regulations on both, which actually strengthens the business case for both. We might see a better outlook for both carbon capture and for hydrogen under Trump administration. Now, as for emissions benefits, the market acceptance of that might be a little bit dicier. But nevertheless, we see the economic case for those being a little bit easier as compliance costs go down.
So I'm just looking again, winners and losers here. How much of this is a day one type of policy thing versus, boy, this is just take a while, to the extent the Trump administration may want to shift gears on this energy transition. It seems like a lot of stuff has already been spent. There's a lot of investment already in the ground. What's the timing, do you think?
Right. Well, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about taxes, there's going to be a big tax negotiation taking up probably most of 2025 to do with extending the Trump tax cuts, seeing what happens with the IRA, et cetera. You're likely to see closure on that by the end of the year, but after that will come regulatory changes and so forth. In general, regulatory changes, including those for existing tax credits, take usually about 2 or 3 years, give or take. And so a lot of this stuff can't really happen on day one. You can't really shift the ship on a dime. However, in terms of tariffs, those are things that can be done more or less immediately, though politically that might not fly too well. And programs that are sort of voluntary, like, again, federal procurement of clean products, those could be killed more or less day one by an executive order.
What about wind and solar? So to some extent, a lot has already been thrown into that, and it's hard to see onshore wind and solar. It's hard for me to reconcile that being really stripped away, but the offshore wind space, that has question marks for me.
Yeah, it does have quite a few. If you look at BNF's modeling for what might happen if the IRA were repealed at the earliest opportunity, which again, we don't think will happen, but even if it did, you would see about a 17% drop overall in the combination of wind, solar, and storage installations. Wind itself, though, would see a much bigger drop because it's very expensive and tax credit dependent. You might see about like 30% drop in onshore wind and an over 40% drop in offshore wind, and that's only based on the financial subsidies, right? Trump has a lot more control over offshore leasing, as well as federal permits. There's a pipeline of projects that already have both offshore leases and permits, but a lot of proposed ones don't have that yet. And there's also questions about how the administration would approach litigation against existing offshore wind permits. You might see some of that fall by the wayside depending on how lawsuits go.
Derek, just broadly defined, how committed is Congress as a legislative body to this whole energy transition? Do they feel like it's real, or how do they feel about it?
Are facilities being built in their states?
Yeah, that's
that
probably
may
a good
actually
answer.
change the answer to
Yeah.
that.
Exactly. From what we've tracked in clean tech factory deployments, I think about 90% is going to red or purple, that is swing states. So there's a lot of electoral consequences, especially if you zoom down at the district level, where overwhelmingly it's Republican districts with cheap land, better labor costs, rich resources. These are the places that are seeing the most investment. And so I think the commitment primarily is to economic development, local opportunity, as well as to some degree onshoring and supply chain diversification and de-risking. And that, I think, is fairly durable in a bipartisan manner.
All right, the most important question of the day, Derek, for you. Are the UNC Tar Heels, are they even going to be able to field a basketball team this year? Go up against my Dukies?
Well, my wife's from Duke, so I'm gonna not take a position on that.
Smart man. All right, very good. All right, Derek, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Derek Flacco, lead U.S. policy analyst for BNEF. Again, one of my thoughts here as we think about it from the energy perspective, it just seems like there's so much, or there is a certain degree of just movement towards cleaner energy, that I'm not sure how you stop it, much less slow it down. But I guess there are certain things that you could do executive order day one.
Yeah, I just think it's also going to be sort of a pick and choose, right? Like I mentioned, sort of the carbon credit tax credit, you could see that staying, but hydrogen feels like a real question mark, maybe more of a push into nuclear. So like there's some nuances there. And also what happens with coal. If you're going to shutter a coal plant, or if you have a clean coal plant, like does that change your calculus? Anyway, lots more to discuss. I miss talking about energy. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio.
Stefana. I'm the owner of the family office and the company called Company I Limited. I also have a live streaming channel for startups. It's SG Trader, so anybody, we let startups to pitch investment community on our channel. I give them 3 minutes pitch. We publish their video on our channel, and everybody who is interested, please welcome to send me your video, and I will publish, I will roll for almost a month your video for all financial community. The channel is live, it's streaming live 5 days a week, from morning to night. Okay.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
$1 of debt. It did tell customers on Monday that they should continue feeling comfortable booking flights now and in the future. I don't
really.
Yeah, okay. I guess that stock is obviously halted for bankruptcy protection filing. We wanted to get the latest now with Francois Duflo. He is U.S. airline analyst with Bloomberg News. He joins us. Bloomberg Intelligence, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, Bloomberg Intelligence. That's important. We want to sparse that out. What happens to Spirit? Like, what does this process wind up looking like?
Yeah, so good morning. Spirit have been struggling since 2020 with losses and cash burns. Things have got only worse since 2023 after the merger with JetBlue was blocked and Pratt and Whitney announced the need for some engines to be inspected, and that grounded some 24 aircraft for this year. So with everything, unit costs have increased faster than unit revenue, both because of inflationary effects and also strong competition. And there was this need of refinance 1.1 billion of debt raised during the pandemic that was backed by a loyalty program, and that was due on September 2025. And there is another 500 million convertible debt due in 2026. And because of this cash burn and losses, this debt was needed to be renegotiated or restructured one way or another, and that's what we managed to do with this announcement today. So 80 million or so of the debt will be equitized. An exit debt of about 800 million will be issued and due on 2030. And in the meantime, Spirit will get 300 million of debt in debtor in possession facility to go through the winter and continue to operate and make sure that flyer and passenger can still fly during this important holiday season.
Is there an expectation about when Spirit will come out of bankruptcy?
So they expect to exit the bankruptcy early March 2025. So there is an extension period of 40 days that is possible. That will still be early 2025, which is a very fast process. But it's also because they managed to pre-arrange most of the big hurdle before filing. So,
could a new administration under President Trump free up some more merger possibilities that were kind of squashed? And does that sort of become Spirit's future in like April of 2025?
That's a good question.
That could be. Definitely, Spirit will emerge from this bankruptcy a leaner and hopefully more profitable in the long-term airlines, not necessarily in 2025. They only hope to get back to profits in 2026, which can be, even though very hard to achieve, but definitely leaner and better position and a more attractive airline for somebody else to grab. And definitely a change of an administration would likely make that easier for a new buyer.
So what kind of looking at Spirit, are they a bad operator, or do they just have a bad capital structure?
No, they face a lot of headwinds from everywhere. Exiting from the pandemic, they faced higher costs because of pilots, because of everything getting more expensive. And at the same time, they faced strong competition from American, Delta, United Airlines, who were looking for passengers to fill seats that business travelers were not filling. And this was pressuring yields at low-cost airlines, including Spirit. And then on top of that, you add their engine problems that makes everything worse, with 1 out of 10 airplane grounded, even though they got some compensation from Pratt & Whitney. So it's a combination of plenty of things, plus the fact that it seems that travelers are moving away from low-cost ticket to more premium fly. And that's why they are also changing their business model a little bit, offering more premium seats and services to their customers, and they're trying to change their experience. And this is not something that is specific to Spirit, but we also see that at Allegiant and Frontier because of this change in customer behavior.
Yeah, and also, then you add things. They make their money by, hey, I'm going to check a bag, I got to pay for something. I want a printed ticket, you got to pay for it. I want a cup of coffee, you got to pay for it. At some point, it's like, guys, enough with that. All right, thanks so much, Francois. We appreciate it. Francois Duflo, he joins us, Bloomberg Intelligence U.S. Airlines analyst, joining us from Princeton, New Jersey. Again, that ticker is SAVE. Also, the big guys, like a Delta United, for example, they can really compete on like lower fares if they want to at the end of the day too.
Right.
So how do you compete with that?
Right, and I didn't understand it, but now since Francois explained it, during the pandemic when they lost some of their business passengers, or a lot of their business passengers, they had to fill those seats, and so let's discount some prices and get those people in. Boom. So I think your question was the best, which is, now that we have a new administration, can we get a deal done with JetBlue or Frontier or one of those two? Because it doesn't seem like they can operate on their own, and it's the smaller markets that get hurt.
Exactly, because then you got to close maybe less flights, and then it actually winds up hurting the people who need the flight there. So that wraps it up for this Monday.
Nice return.
All right, thank you. Nice to see you. Miss some Paul Sweeney. Listen to him on the radio, though, so that was always fun. This is Bloomberg Intelligence. You got Balance of Power with Joe Matthew is coming up next. Just taking a look here at where the market is. The S&P is up by 0.4%, holding steady. The NASDAQ is up by about 0.7%. The Dow flat.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Steve Kathan. In a policy shift, the U.S. tells Ukraine it's okay to use American-made weapons for strikes deeper inside Russia. CBS's Imtiaz Tayyab reports it comes after Moscow launched one of the largest attacks on Ukrainian civilians.
Ukrainian forces will be able to retaliate harder and further like never before, following President Biden's decision to allow the use of U.S.-supplied long-range missiles deep inside Russia. The Army tactical missile systems travel at supersonic speed and has a range of up to 190 miles.
Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, on CBS Mornings.
In my opinion, it was about time that the United States gave the Ukrainians the ability to defend themselves more completely.
Well, CBS's Wendy Gillette tells us the top U.S. budget airline has landed in bankruptcy court.
Spirit says it will continue operating as normal during a streamlined Chapter 11 process. That includes all flights and reservations and employee pay. The process is expected to end in the first quarter of next year.
AAA expects around 80 million of us will book a flight or train or take a long drive for the Thanksgiving holiday. CBS's Chris Van Cleve.
AAA found an increase in the number of people leaving on Tuesday and coming back Monday. So they expect Tuesday and Wednesday before Thanksgiving to be very busy on the roads, as well as Sunday and Monday after Thanksgiving.
More testimony today in the Georgia murder trial of Jose Ibarra, the Venezuelan man in the country illegally who's charged with killing student Laken Riley. CBS's Jared Eggleston.
We're hearing they asked him about some scratches and some injuries that he had had. The officer saying that it looked like a fingernail scratch was on Ibarra's arm. That is key because on Friday we heard about DNA that was under Laken Riley's right hand.
Well, CBS's Jim Krasula has an update now on the missing monkey story.
And then there were 6. That's how many monkeys are still on the loose in South Carolina's Low Country after 43 of them made a break for it from a compound that breeds primates for medical research. They went on the lam November 6th after a worker at what locals in Yemassee, South Carolina call, quote, the monkey farm did not close a gate properly.
In Houston, the ballpark the Astros play in, Minute Maid Park, got a new name.
On the horizon, a new chapter awaits our city. A new chapter with a new name, Daikin Park.
The video revealed today Daikin is an air conditioning company. Wall Street, the Dow is down 15 points. This is CBS News. Well, some of us gladly take a pass on some things that are passed around the Thanksgiving table.
Where's the mashed potatoes? Where's the cranberry sauce?
Well, you might want to skip that cranberry sauce, even though many think it's not a Thanksgiving feast without it. According to a survey by Instacart, cranberry sauce was one of the most hated side dishes. People are over the green bean casserole, too. And another least favorite, candied yams.
What's this? A piece of toast?
But considering the average Thanksgiving meal features at least 5 side dishes, you've got plenty to choose from. Stacey Lynn, CBS News.
In India, because of bad pollution, officials in the capital, New Delhi, closed schools, stopped construction, and banned non-essential trucks today. Could last for a week. In some places, pollution levels are 50 times higher than the recommended safe limit. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Donald Trump fills out the cabinet, but there's still one big hole left. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the president-elect announces his picks for energy and for the FCC. The real drama, though, still surrounding the Treasury Department. We'll have the latest from Washington here with insights ahead from Republican strategist Ashley Davis at West Front Strategies. She'll be with us right here at the table. Joe Biden is in Brazil, G20. We'll be joined by Bloomberg's David Gura, who's traveling with the president in Rio. And we'll talk to Bloomberg's Dan Flatley with a major development about U.S. support in Ukraine. Insights today from our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist Rick Davis is back with us. Partner at Stone Court Capital, joined by Democratic analyst Caitlin Legacki. So let's get to it. We start, as always, on Wall Street. And for that, we turn to Charlie Pellet at World Headquarters in New York. Charlie?
Well, good afternoon, Joe Matthew. Welcome back. We have got stocks trading mixed right now. We're looking at a loss in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Has been swinging between gains and losses. Down 21 right now, little change, but the S&P off-session highs up 23, up by about 0.4%. And the NASDAQ Composite Index up 121 right now. That is a gain of just under 0.1%. Your 10-year, 4.43%. The 2-year, 4.29%. Spot gold up $46 the ounce, up 1.8%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.8%, 68.88 a barrel. And Bitcoin now at 91,220, up by 2.3%. Bottom line here, stocks rebounding after last week's 2% slide on the S&P as a rout in treasuries abated after 10-year yields approached 4.5%. So what is happening with traders and investors as to the outlook? Thomas Kennedy is Chief Investment Strategist for Global Wealth Management at JP Morgan Securities.
I think we're still digesting what the possibilities of outcomes could be for the Trump administration, and there are wide-ranging expectations, and so much is in the details, so much uncertainty. I think what we did need to price was a pro-growth environment where you're going to see deficit spending, deregulation, some offsets from tariffs, but how far can that really go becomes the question. When we stack it up, it looks like a pro-growth environment.
Thomas Kennedy of JP Morgan Securities interviewed on Bloomberg Surveillance. And by the way, you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. Download it wherever you get your podcasts. This week, we hear from 2 key retailers. Tomorrow, we'll be hearing from Walmart. Right now, we have got Walmart shares. They are trading little change right now. Actually, Walmart down by 0.4%. Target up by 2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues, the Monday edition. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Yes, the Monday edition indeed. Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. The start of a new week. Still many of the same questions, though, we were asking about the transition at the end of last week. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite radio, and on YouTube, where you can find us now. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. Capture our live stream. Your life will be better for it. As we try to fill in the blanks, we got some big announcements, right? Friday into Saturday into Sunday. Everybody's talking about the transition. Brendan Carr, FCC. By the way, another one of the authors of Project 2025, in the fold. Energy goes to Chris Wright. Liberty Energy, that's a pretty big deal, by the way. This is the same man who drank fracking fluid on camera to prove its safety. Wrote on X that his dedication to bettering human lives remains steadfast. There is no climate crisis, he claimed in a video last year, and we are not in the midst of an energy transition either. And then there's the whole conversation about Matt Gaetz, Pete Hegseth. The lawyers, I guess, are out doing interviews now. Do we get the ethics report out of the House? You would think that would be the big drama. But the story that's occupying everyone right now is who will be Treasury Secretary. It's funny how this stuff goes sometimes. But that is, in fact, the decision that Donald Trump is wrestling over right now. And it looks like the field could be widening. We had this down to Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick the end of last week. Enter Mark Rowan and Kevin Warsh as Donald Trump starts to look beyond the names he's already talking about. We heard earlier from Kyle Bass on Bloomberg, Heyman Capital. He talked about his preference for Scott Bessent in his interview earlier today on Bloomberg Surveillance. Listen.
Global central bankers around the world have respect for Bessent and his views. Scott looks at the world, with a 4D chess overlay, meaning he understands geopolitics, he understands people, he understands exactly what investment flows and economic flows matter and don't matter.
So much talk of 4D chess, by the way, like every conversation, unless they're calling it 3D chess, we need new cliches. And so for help, we turn to Ashley Davis. Delighted that she's with us here at the table. A familiar voice on this program, Westfront Strategies principal Republican strategist. Great to see you.
Nice to see you.
Now that you're back in the country for 5 minutes, we get to talk about a couple of things here. I can't imagine what's going through your mind right now. I just want to start maybe with the big questions, this whole lineup. We can weigh in on the candidates, the Treasury, the agency, but you're stepping back looking at this. Having come out of the Bush administration, having spent time in the initial stages of Homeland Security, thinking what about the composite of names that we have as a presentation of what this new administration is going to be? Is this going well or not?
Well, first of all, nice to be on the show. Thank you. First of all, I do think that there are several that are very good nominees. I mean, we obviously, Marco Rubio, I was just looking, yeah. He's going to be starting January 20th on the dot, so as Secretary of State. So they are going to announce a new senator in Florida very soon. Mm-hmm. But you also have, I think actually Christine Ohm would be just fine. We can talk about DHS in a second. Mm-hmm. She is an executive of state. However, I think that there's obviously people like Matt Gaetz that is very controversial. I personally feel that President-elect Trump is sitting back and watching the chaos around Gaetz happen, and there's lots of chatter around that. Obviously, he can only lose 3 votes in regards to getting confirmed, because assuming that J.D. Vance would make a tie-break vote. But I think, if there is one, but I really think it's going to be hard for him going to go through. Senator Grassley is now chairman of the Judiciary Committee, that who's a very serious, takes the job very seriously senator, that he'll actually get through that confirmation. Now, in regards to JFK Jr., I actually think because he was vetted already under President Obama
RFK
for
Jr., yes.
RFK, sorry. Yes, RFK. He was vetted already for EPA secretary or administrator under the President Obama. I have a feeling, and also you have Cassidy. He's on the Finance Committee. There's a dual confirmation process for the HHS secretary, both the Finance Committee as well as the Health and Labor and Pension Committee. So Cassidy's up in 2 years. He's probably not going to want to go after the Trump folks, and so I actually see RFK Jr.
That seems to be the feel that everybody probably gets the job after Matt Gaetz. What do we do about Matt Gaetz? And I guess it raises the question, if it weren't for the ethics investigation, if it weren't for the vitriol and the hatred, I guess, that he has garnered on Capitol Hill, could he do this job? I mean, what are the qualifications for running the Department of Justice?
Right. I mean, I think it's a very low bar that he would be. I mean, the position's such a high bar, but he absolutely would not be able to do this, I don't think. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of kind of his rhetoric, but you know, everyone keeps talking about this report that's coming out. Right. And is it going to come out? Is it not coming out? And I think it's very important to remember that if the ethics this is a standard rule by the ethics committee that they all sign an affidavit that they're not allowed to release these reports. If it starts happening, that means if every single member of Congress on the House side that gets investigated, their report, if they start doing it for Matt Gaetz, they can actually probably make any other report public. So from a president perspective, I don't think that you would want to do that.
So Mike Johnson isn't going to go there.
I don't think he should.
But it could come
just
out
from
in any number of ways.
Well, I was just going to say,
the confirmation.
Exactly. Remember, he has to go through a very stringent FBI background check, and if the FBI is going to do their job, the first people they're going to interview are members of the ethics committee. Yes, so this is probably going to be taken care of already.
We learned over the weekend, Pete Hegseth, of course, the Secretary of Defense nominee, paid a woman in a settlement that involved accusations of sexual assault. How ugly is all this stuff going to get? I mean, we can drill down on these stories. That's not really what Bloomberg is here for. We're trying to figure out what these choices mean for policy, but the next couple of weeks could get real nasty around here as opponents try to stop these nominations. Absolutely, and I actually just heard over the weekend that the Democrats are putting their own plan together, which the Republicans would as well, so I'm not picking sides here, that they are trying to figure out how they are going to completely go after Trump and all of his appointees over the next 12 to 18 months. Of course, that's what they should do. They're in the minority, and that's the benefit of being in the minority, is going after the administration as well as their. But I think it's going to be ugly, and this is where there's good people out there that do not take public service jobs anymore because of this exact fact. Would you want your whole life upended in front of supposedly the DOD nominees? There was some, this was not supposed to become public, and it's obviously become public. Right. There was an NDA that was signed, whatever. Yes, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I don't know the story, and I'm not. Gives you a sense of the climate we're entering here. Exactly. Right. You mentioned Kristi Noem. Someone with executive experience as a governor makes you feel better about running an agency. This seems to be lost in the conversation right now. It's like, well, does Matt Gaetz have experience as a lawyer? Well, does Hegseth have experience? These are management positions. Speak to the importance of, in her case, being a governor, having run something. Yeah, and this is where maybe I'm extra sensitive about this, because when we were setting up the department after 9/11, Tom Ridge was criticized as being a governor and not being able to, how is he going to have any experience, one, in regards to Homeland Security policy, as well as running a department the size of it was. But listen, that position is a management position. The secretary is a management position. So her being able to run a state as a second-term governor, I think she'll be able to do. In regards to the immigration policy, the mass deportations that obviously are going to be happening probably day one, I see he will sign an executive order. Yep. But I think that since you do have Stephen Miller, who'll be in the White House, who's obviously a hawk on these issues. You also have Tom Homan, who's going to be the czar of the border. And then also you'll have someone that's in charge of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Committee, or section of DHS. So I think that she'll be up here is what I would think. And the 3 or 4 or 5 people will be underneath her, probably with these policies, coordinating with Stephen in the White House. You mentioned mass deportation. Donald Trump confirming today on Truth Social that his plan will involve a national emergency declaration as well as the military. He responded to a post to this to that end, responding true, all caps, 3 exclamation points, to a conservative activist who said he had heard such reports. How is this going to work? What do you make of that approach? This sounds like a day one, get the Sharpie out as soon as you're in the Oval Office. Yeah, I'm assuming this is as many executive orders he will need to do the mass deportation. I think he'll do on day one. I mean, obviously, this was the number 1 or number 2 with the economy issue for the election. Republicans and Democrats believe in this issue, so I don't know how he backs off of it. The question is that many are asking is, how is it paid for? Today, he said it doesn't matter what it costs. I mean, with the appropriations process, I am getting in the weeds here, probably being punted until March, according to the Speaker
over the weekend, that do you do an emergency spending on mass deportation or what immigration with that package, which is a possibility. And I don't know how Republicans or Democrats vote against something like that when it is the number one issue facing the country.
That's fascinating.
The question is, does he bring in the National Guard? What does the National Guard work with the Customs and Border Patrol to try to find these people that are spread throughout the country? Remember how many of the people that cross the border illegally have been bused to other parts of the country.
It brings up a couple of questions here. Just to go back a little bit, you said multiple executive orders would be required. Why is that?
Well, I'm not sure exactly, but when he came into office, I think I forget the actual number he had to do, just hitting on different parts of the immigration law.
So
I
in this
would think
particular case, then, you do have agencies bumping into each other, including the Pentagon. How do you manage that?
Well, he's the president. He can call up the National Guard. Remember the January 6th
But doesn't that
conversation?
involve states as well? I mean, it sounds like you have a very large table full of stakeholders here to pull this off.
Absolutely. And it's going to again, I would think, because of the issue in regards to the country, and this is only 2 months away. Obviously, you've seen a lot of people come out over the last few weeks since the election talking about where our grocery prices be higher if all of these people that are working in our country that are illegal are sent out of the country. I mean, you do have the fear-mongering happening right now in regards to...
Well, are they going to raid workplaces? This is one thing we hear about. Whether it be farms, whether it be manufacturing. These are the kind of things that people could see in real time and have a visceral reaction to, maybe in a good way, I don't know, but that's going to be a pretty major moment in American history when this happens.
I would assume that there are going to be different levels, and I would think the first levels are going to be places where there are these so-called gangs of people that have come in. And
So
I
those
would
will
think,
be pretty well received, I suspect.
Absolutely. I think that there will then be second and third tiers that will happen that probably won't be as public. And what they're talking about now is actually arresting them for being here illegal, and then they'll probably take them to the border in a holding pattern, and then they'll ship them back over the border.
You mentioned the appropriations process. It's pretty impossible to estimate what that would cost, isn't it? And then to transport people back to countries of origin, wow, we've got a lot to figure out still.
But also, you have to look at what's being used now with what's been happening, holding them when they do cross the border. So you'll probably reprogram a lot of that money to send them back over the border.
We need to stay in touch here because you're going to leave many more headlines. Well, then I'm going to need to talk to Ashley Davis again. Thank you for coming in. Westfront Strategies, Ashley Davis with us live here on Bloomberg. We need to update the markets before we move on here. Live from Washington, Charlie Pellet has that for us in New York. Charlie, how's it look?
And good day once again, Joe Matthew. Indeed, looking at a mixed market right now. With the Dow lower, we got the S&P, NASDAQ both advancing on this back-to-work Monday, right to the numbers with a 25-point jump on the S&P, up by 0.4%. That follows last week's 2.1% rout on the index. So the S&P now at 58.95. The Dow up 124, up 0.7%. But the Dow in the red. We've got the Dow down less than 0.1%, down 11 again. NASDAQ up by 0.7%. 10-year yield at 4.3. Right now we've got the 10-year at 4.42%. It's the 2-year at 4.209%. Gold up $45 the ounce, back above 2,600, 2,608, up by 1.8%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.9%, 68.93, and Bitcoin 92,075 on Bitcoin, up right now by 3.3%. MicroStrategy making news today as it adds to its hoard of Bitcoin. MicroStrategy bought about 51,780 Bitcoin for around $4.6 billion, the largest purchase by the crypto hedge fund Proxy since it began acquiring the digital asset more than 4 years ago. MicroStrategy shares surging now by 9.5%. Again, Bitcoin worth repeating, up 3.3%, 92,060 right now on Bitcoin. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, thank you as always, watching the markets for us as we cover politics in Washington. We do this every day on Bloomberg, and glad you're with us for the Monday edition. Coming up about a half hour from now, we'll welcome our global television audience. Kaylee Lyons will join the conversation, and we'll be cooking with gas here at the beginning of another very busy week as we focus on the transition, also the lame duck session And that duck is quacking. We've got a funding deadline on the December 20th, and there is no plan right now to avert a shutdown. Not that I'm saying it will happen, but we need to figure out a path, and we'll talk about that a little bit later this hour. As Joe Biden makes his way around the world, you haven't asked me about Joe Biden lately. I don't know what that is. In Rio de Janeiro for the G20, did you see him in the rainforest over the weekend? If you Google Joe Biden rainforest or Joe Biden Amazon, as I see here, video has gone viral of him, quote unquote, Newsweek, the headline, wandering into the Amazon rainforest as if he was lost. He wasn't lost. He did have kind of the denim shirt thing. He was going casual in the rainforest, signing memoranda on a tree stump, speaking at the podium there, surrounded by the palms. Not quite the same optics today as he gets to the G20. You know, he was in Peru over the weekend as well, where he held a bilateral, his final with President Xi of China. Here's Joe Biden over the weekend in Lima.
We haven't always agreed, but our conversations have always been candid and always been frank. We have never kidded one another. We've been level with one another. I think that's vital. These conversations prevent miscalculations, and they ensure the competition between our two countries will not veer into conflict. Be competition, not conflict.
Competition, not conflict, a refrain we've heard more than once from this administration. And I'll tell you what, when Joe Biden is at his last G20, we activate the asset. Do you know who's traveling with the president? Bloomberg's David Gura. If you're with us on YouTube, get a load of this shot and don't be jealous. David is working very hard today. Mr. Gura, it's great to see you. Thanks for your great reporting. I'm delighted you're with us here on Balance of Power. Talk to me about the point of this exercise. Is this a farewell tour, or is Joe Biden actually conducting business on the road?
He's trying to, but this is the farewell tour. This in compliment with the APEC summit that you just mentioned. I don't know if we can put the rainforest visit in the trio there, but he is here making the case for all that his administration has managed to accomplish, and also raising the flag for the importance of multilateral institutions like this one. This is a cause that Joe Biden has cared a lot about through his career in the Senate, as vice president, as president now. He sees a lot of good in these gatherings, in getting world leaders together and trying to present a unified front. Now, of course, the G20 has a funny flavor of that because you do have some U.S. adversaries in the mix. Russia is here. The president didn't come to Rio, but the foreign minister did. So having to navigate that can be a bit tricky. But Joe Biden, once again, making the case that it's important for these world leaders to get together and talk about kind of the big picture, top-line items that are important to countries around the world. Now, you mentioned what happened at APEC, him sitting down with President Xi Jinping, the first conversation those two world leaders have had since April of this year. They talked by telephone then. That also a moment for Joe Biden to note that the relationship now between the U.S. and China is markedly better than it was when he inherited it, that was a frosty relationship under President Donald Trump, made frostier by the tariffs that were put in place, by the rhetoric that certainly ratcheted up during that administration. Of course, we're now at a moment where the world knows that Donald Trump is going back to the White House. So the open question is how much of what Joe Biden is saying, both in Peru and Brazil, is resonant versus how much are these world leaders sort of looking ahead to what's to come in a couple of months. And it's familiar territory for them. They've lived through this before. There's not as much uncertainty, Joe, as there was in the past about how Donald Trump governs a country. But they certainly want to know what's bluster and what's likely to come to pass and what they heard from him on the campaign trail.
Yeah, I'm just in a trance looking at this backdrop. James, is the water moving? That's real, right? That's not a green screen. David Gura, oh my God, look at this. So I guess, David, we talk about Trump proofing and all this stuff. That now we are going to talk to Dan Flatley in a moment about the evolution of the use of U.S. provided weapons in Ukraine. Is Joe Biden having these conversations right now about how to prepare for the next administration?
Well, look, he's having far fewer bilateral conversations than he would have had in years past, and had he won re-election. just a handful of them lined up for him while he's here in Rio. But the broader conversation about Ukraine, what happens with that conflict, is certainly a live issue here, and one I think every leader who's gathered here is talking about. So much has happened over these last few days, from the attack that we saw most recently on Ukraine, to the phone call that the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz had with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, to the news that you alluded to, that the United States is going to allow for the use of weapons in limited capacity for Ukrainian forces to strike Russian forces on Russian territory. All of that is kind of coloring the conversations about the communique, the statement that these countries are going to release at the end. How specific are they going to be? And as you can imagine, Joe, there are varying views on where all of this is headed. Now, our colleagues at Bloomberg News have reported on the fact that among U.S. allies, Ukrainian allies, there are more of them kind of coalescing around this idea that it has to approach a negotiated settlement sooner rather than later. That's not going to be hashed out here, but we do know that Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, is having many more bilateral meetings than President Joe Biden is, and what these world leaders want to hear from him is, how did that telephone call go? It was extraordinary if you look at the scope of this war for that conversation to take place. What did he hear from President Putin? What did he tell President Putin? And what are the next steps here as we move forward? Joe Biden, of course, wants to leave the White House having ensured that he's given the Ukrainians all of the resources that they need to keep fighting, but I think he's aware, those watching him are aware, that he has limited control over what happens here in just a couple months' time.
David Gura, fascinating and great reporting, David, from the G20 in Rio. They send us typically to Des Moines or Milwaukee. This is a whole new level. Dan Flatley is with us now for more on the loosening of the reins in Ukraine. Really important story here. We've been creeping up on this for months and talking about it for longer. Dan Flatley, Bloomberg national security reporter. Great to see you, sir, as the headline just crosses the terminal. Biden to seek over $98 billion in emergency disaster relief. He's also seeking to kick out the remaining cash and materiel approved for Ukraine before he leaves office. But speak to this development here, these ATACMS missiles that will be allowed to be used offensively against Russia, which is calling this escalatory. I believe Donald Trump Jr. called this potentially the start of World War III.
Yes. Well, you know, lots of takes on this, Joe. As you know, I mean, the stated reason that the Biden administration has given, or what they've indicated, is that this has to do with North Korean troops fighting, you know, on behalf of Russia in this Kursk region, and they're trying to limit the use of these ATACMS, these long-range weapon systems, to that region, which is part of Russia but is being held by Ukrainian troops at the moment. And so, you know, this has been something that Zelensky has asked for and sought for months at this point. So I was just sort of texting with somebody earlier, you know, a supporter of Ukraine who's been pushing the Biden administration to do more quickly and sort of characterize this as way too little, way too late. Now, that's one person's view of this, obviously. On the other hand, you have what Russia is calling this, characterizing this as an escalatory move. It's, you know, let's not go, you know, necessarily in that direction, but we will say that the Biden administration has sought over time to limit, you know, the potential for this conflict to get out of hand. Right. That's been one of their priorities as this has played out. So it comes at an interesting time. Again, the stated reason, or the indication, is that it has to do with North Korean troops, but also we have President-elect Donald Trump coming into office in January. And, you know, is this a move to perhaps solidify some of the support to give Ukraine the tools that it needs before we see a major push on the part of the U.S. toward a negotiated settlement? We don't know, you know, whether that piece of the puzzle, that hasn't been fully fleshed out on the part of Trump yet. So all of these things obviously are moving pieces, and we're all trying to kind of figure out exactly what's going on here. But certainly a significant development. Is it enough? Is it too little, too late? You know, I think only time will tell.
A couple specifics for the lay people listening here, including me. Why only the Kursk region, and what can these ATACMS do that other missiles we provided them cannot?
Well, Zelensky has always pushed for this type of missile system, or systems like it, long-range weapon systems.
So they're longer range. Are they more precise? What kind of targets would we be using, or they would be using?
They're longer range, more precise. The idea is essentially that, I mean, the lines here have been frozen to a certain extent for many months now. Now, you did have a breakthrough on the part of the Ukrainian troops into this region of Russia, which was viewed at the time as potentially a game changer.
Yes,
again,
right.
things have kind of gotten bogged down again. But Zelensky's reason for wanting these longer range systems and wanting to be able to strike into Russia is somewhat different from the offensive nature of what they did in Kursk. It's to limit Russia's ability to carry out strikes on Ukrainian territory. So they have said in the past that they want to target Russian missile systems, Russian weapon systems. They want to limit Russia's ability to strike targets in Ukrainian territory, which has obviously happened many, many times over the last 2 years. So there's been a lot of frustration on the part of the Ukrainians that the U.S. has not signed off on this up to this point, because they're sort of sitting there in Kyiv saying, you know, our civilians are being targeted. Shouldn't we be able to at least defend ourselves? Of course, you have this question of an escalation and, you know, allowing strikes on Russian territory. Would that prompt some sort of additional response from Russia? You know, that has always been in the background. And in terms of why just Kursk, I think that is a response to this idea that you want to escalate, but not too far. And so
possibly a counteroffensive coming again before Donald Trump gets in office. A lot of questions here. This will be really interesting to see how this all evolves. Dan Flatley with Bloomberg in Washington from our national security team. Thanks for walking us through this as we try to feel for the truth here. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for spending some time with us on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. We'll assemble our panel next. Rick Davis is back, and Caitlin Legacki is here. From the left and the right, we'll try to make sense of the headlines from the transition to Congress next.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing right now, with the S&P up 27, up by about 0.5%. The Dow higher by 8, little changed, has been swinging between gains and losses, with NASDAQ now up 119 points, up by 0.6%. And the Russell 2000 index also higher by 0.6%. The 10-year yield, 4.42%. The 2-year, 4.29%. Gold up $1.75 the ounce, back above 2,600, 26.07 on the precious metal, while West Texas Intermediate crude is rallying 2.6%, 68.74 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin now up 2.3%, 91,615 on Bitcoin. Tesla shares are up by 6.8%. Sources tell Bloomberg members of President-elect Donald Trump's transition team have told advisors they plan to make a federal framework for fully self-driving vehicles one of the Transportation Department's priorities. David Welch wrote the story for Bloomberg News.
Elon himself said on the third quarter earnings call that he favors some sort of federal framework or federal set of rules for autonomous vehicles. We don't really have one right now, and we don't know exactly what the Trump team wants to put in place, and honestly, they may not know at this point. We just know that it's a priority as they look to name a new Department of Transportation secretary.
And Welch was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Open Interest. Again, Tesla up right now by 6.8%. Rivian up 5.5% among other automakers. Ford shares up by almost 2%. GM down 0.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. The Monday edition. Back we go to Washington. And once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, great to see you. Happy Monday. Charlie Pellet with us on the markets every day here on the fastest show in politics. It is the Monday edition. We're clearing out the cobwebs here and trying to answer a lot of the same questions we were working on last week here on Bloomberg. Thanks for joining on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, where you can find us right now. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. Not just this program. Our live stream goes all day from New York to Washington and back again, with the big question about the appointments beyond who and can they be confirmed, the question about motivation. Is Donald Trump serious? Do we take him literally? You know the old line, don't take him literally, take him seriously. Wasn't that it? Well, we are. And so there are questions about Matt Gaetz. Is he being real, or is this some sort of 3D chess? Or is it 4D chess? It depends, again, on who you're talking to. The answer from Mar-a-Lago is it's real. This is not deal-making. This is not putting up a sacrificial play here to make another candidate look good. Donald Trump wants them all confirmed. Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., yes, Matt Gaetz. Donald Trump Jr. on the Sunday morning circuit made that pretty clear on Fox News. Here he is.
We have control of the Senate because of my father. John Thune's able to be the majority leader because of my father, because he got a bunch of other people over the line. That was, on his coattails. He overperformed all of those people. Yeah. He was able to get them over the finish line.
Don Jr. making it clear. John Thune, we expect you to get these people confirmed. Let's assemble the panel. It's been a while since we've had time to check in with Rick Davis, and deeply curious to hear what he's got in mind. Back from his world tour on Bloomberg, here he is, partner at Stone Court Capital, Bloomberg politics contributor and Republican strategist. Been a minute since we've seen Caitlin Legacki as well. Democratic strategist, former senior advisor at the Department of Commerce. By the way, Commerce, we're still waiting on something official there. So let's get into this, guys. It's great to see you. Rick, what is your thought on this very basic question here? Does Donald Trump mean what he says when it comes to all of these appointments? Is there some deal-making involved here, or John Thune is expected to get it done?
Yeah, I think John Thune's expected to get it done. I don't think in this case Donald Trump wanted to put anybody up that he wasn't willing to use his political credibility to get passed through Senate confirmation. And if not passed through Senate confirmation, doing what he has asked, which is the Senate would recess and he would make a recess appointment for these folks. And it wouldn't surprise me that we don't get a combination of those items, that some people get through confirmation and some people may have to wait until there's a recess in order to be made recess appointments. And then all of a sudden, we're going to find Donald Trump lobbying John Thune to get the heck out of town. And so I think they have a lot of different options in this category. And I have every expectation that when Donald Trump, named Pete Hegseth and, Matt Gaetz and Tulsi Gabbard, that he had every intention of putting them in. Because remember the one fundamental thing that Donald Trump wants to accomplish in this second go round, and that is to destabilize the system that kept him from accomplishing the things that he wanted to do in his first term. And he's smarter, he's got a more educated team around him, and arguably maybe even more driven than in the first term. And I think you're going to see Washington under siege. And it's exactly what he campaigned on, and it's exactly what he's going to do.
Washington under siege. Caitlin, you know what people have been saying, at least some people, wanted to save Matt Gaetz from this ethics investigation in the House, maybe even set him up for a seat in the Senate if it goes well with Marco Rubio. And if it doesn't pan out, the next candidate will look like a savior. How do you approach these appointments? Do you take Donald Trump at his word?
Yeah, I think he wants Matt Gaetz at DOJ. Donald Trump has been very clear about what he would like to do, both with DOJ and the FBI, in terms of prosecuting his political enemies, as well as exonerating his political allies who have come under federal investigation. So I really don't think that there's checkers or even chess at play here. This is really him telling us what he wants and then seeing how far Senate Republicans are going to let him go.
Okay. I want to talk about the ethics report. I don't know if we can hear from the speaker and what he had to say on Sunday morning, but Mike Johnson has been asked about this a couple of times, and he's made it pretty clear that you're not going to see that ethics report, at least in the traditional sense, because remember, Matt Gaetz resigned last week. When we heard about this, the first time we heard about this, he had already resigned his congressional seat, also making the Sunday rounds. Here's the Speaker of the House.
We don't issue investigations and ethics reports on people who are not members of Congress. I'm afraid that that would open a Pandora's box because the jurisdiction of the Ethics Committee is limited to those who are serving in the institution. That's its very purpose. And I think this would be a breach of protocol that could be dangerous for us going forward in the future.
Now we're hearing reports that a lawyer representing this young lady who was interviewed by the Ethics Committee is going to start making interviews. And, you know, Congress leaks like a sieve, Rick Davis. How will we hear about this and in what form?
Well, look, I mean, anybody who would get through Senate confirmation is going to go through an FBI background check. And here's the problem. The FBI, under the supervision of the Justice Department, is going to investigate the guy who is actually going to be the head of the Justice Department. So you can only imagine the rift with conflict situation there. And look, I actually don't blame the Speaker for taking a position that former members, aren't going to see their reports made public. It's a risk by Gaetz. I mean, this might not work out at the Justice Department for any number of reasons, and then he's out of a congressional seat. So he took the risk of bailing so that he doesn't make this public. But the bottom line is, whether it's public or private, the administration, the committee is going to see, in essence, what the elements are of the FBI investigation into Matt Gaetz. And who knows, maybe the FBI investigation has everything the the Ethics Committee has. So I don't think it's going to lack for scrutiny. Let's just put it that way.
What do you think, Caitlin? Because it sounds to me like this is all going to be on Front Street in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, again, I understand why Johnson doesn't want to create this precedent, but I also think in a moment in time when there is significant distrust in our institutions, if Matt Gaetz didn't have something significant to hide, he would be calling for it to be released. And so, what's very clear is that Donald Trump is not concerned about what's in that report, and neither is Matt Gaetz. I think what's also concerning, though, is, Rick was talking about the FBI background checks into nominees. But what we also know is that a lot of the high-level Trump appointees are circumventing the traditional background check process, where they may or may not be subjected to FBI background checks. And so, there is a lot of norm breaking happening. There's a lot of trying to upend the system. And I think that it sets, a disastrous precedent to nominate someone like Matt Gaetz to this role. But that is the point. That's entirely the point. And that's what Trump wants to achieve.
It's just amazing to me with all the drama surrounding Matt Gaetz, DOJ. Pete Hegseth has got his own situation here. We'll probably be hearing a lot more about this. Apparently, he did pay a woman in a sexual assault settlement, a case that he has claimed innocence. But this is all going to be dug up here, right, as part of the confirmation process. Yet, Rick Davis, the Trump camp is bound up with the Treasury Department. This is the big fight right now. The drama is around who will be the Treasury Secretary. Elon Musk has gotten involved. We've got people endorsing online. Scott Bessent is going to meet with Donald Trump after Musk backed Lutnick. Trump is upset that Lutnick is trying to promote himself while he's helping to build the transition. And so we're seeing new names emerge at this hour. Kevin Warsh and Mark Rowan. What do you make of this all happening in the public eye, Rick?
Yeah, it's never nice to watch the sausage being made. And the good news is all the people that they're discussing, I'm sure, would be more than qualified to be a good Treasury Secretary. I'm a little surprised Elon Musk hasn't done one of his patented, who do you want to have as your Treasury Secretary, and do an online X poll, because that seems to be the thing that he enjoys doing. But yeah, you're right. I mean, this has turned into a little bit of a controversy because of all the campaigning. And it's interesting to me that Donald Trump has been distracted. He's made all these other major announcements around State Department and Defense Department and Justice Department. I mean, those are the big three. The other fourth is Treasury. And honestly, I would have thought that'd be the first one that he would have announced, since most of his campaign rhetoric was based on being able to turn around the economy. And so I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell what that dynamic is inside of Mar-a-Lago. Not a whole lot of people are talking, but it does seem to be boiling up. There have been reports about screaming matches at parties. I mean, this could get interesting before we actually get an announcement. But I think that it's more of a process question than a person.
You'd start wondering as well, Caitlin, if he who shall not be Treasury Secretary, and we can add Bill Hagerty's name to that list, might end up running your former agency. Commerce is still sitting empty as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, the crux of this whole process is that Trump understands and recognizes that his entire brand is the economy and the strength of the economy. And so I actually take his hesitation in naming the Treasury Secretary as a major tell that he is deeply conflicted about who is going to be ultimately at, the center of his administration, whether it's tariffs policy, whether it's the stock markets, whether it's tax policy. I think it underscores that he knows what the stakes are for his legacy. As much as he doesn't care about that in other ways, it's clear he cares about this. And then I think you'll see that trickle down to some of the other economic agencies, whether it's labor or commerce, USTR, because everything will flow from Treasury. So, commerce is interesting because there's a lot of tech policy there. There's a lot of international competition with China policy that happens there. And I think in those areas, it's relatively bipartisan in terms of the issue portfolio. But then you also have bureaus like the NOAA and the National Weather Service, where those are targets for Project 2025. So I think once Trump figures out who he wants at Treasury, then the pieces will start to fall in place from there.
Fascinating. Great inside view here with Rick Davis and Caitlin Legacki. Rick, we've only got about 30 seconds left in this part of our conversation. We should remind everybody that Donald Trump is actually announcing things at a pretty steady clip. It feels like we're waiting around for Treasury, but that's only because the first batch came out so quickly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth pointing out that there's a lot of competition to be in a Trump administration. I mean, if people thought that this was going to be kind of a dangerous place to occupy space, and it certainly isn't indicated in these early rounds of appointments. People are clamoring to be part of this administration, and so be it the Treasury Secretary's stiff competition. So at the end of the day, I think they're going to be able to staff up this administration quickly.
Rick Davis, Caitlin Legacki have a lot more ahead in our second hour here on the fastest show in politics. Stay with us as we welcome our global television audience to the conversation. Live from Washington, this is Bloomberg.
Stefana. I'm the owner, I have a family office and the company called Company I Limited. I also have a live streaming channel for startups. It's SG Trader, so anybody, we let startups to pitch investment community on our channel. I give them 3-minute pitch, we publish their video on our channel, and everybody who is interested, please welcome to send me your video, and I will publish, I will roll for almost a month your video for all financial community. The channel is live, it's streaming live 5 days a week, from morning till night.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
I just don't know how he covers the ground he does. He's willing to work. I mean, and I couldn't get as much done anyway. You know, what I could do in a couple of hours, you know, may take 8 hours now. I just don't read as fast and different things. But it's working very well. And this place, if anything happened to me, it would be working extremely well the next day. I don't get any phone calls. It can actually, we can rig something up so we have some answering machine that people think I'm still around, you know, or something.
And why specifically have you invested Burlington Northern instead of buying a capital-efficient company like American Express?
You're killing me, Daphne. I'm certainly glad she's not 9 years old. Yeah. What is unusual about Berkshire is that a very significant number of Berkshire shareholders located all over the United States, not just in Omaha, but the number of different Berkshire holders who have contributed $100 million or more to their local charities, usually with people not knowing about it, I think is many multiples of any other public company in the country. They're not more multiples than Bill's put a whole lot into philanthropy, and I don't know the details of the family, but clearly there's a huge sum of money that the Warren family, I'm sure, has done all kinds of things philanthropic and will continue to do it. But I don't think you'll find any company where a group of shareholders who aren't related to each other, so many of them have done something along the lines of what Ruth did a few weeks ago, just to exchange a little piece of paper that they've held for 5 decades, and they
up by about 0.6%, and we've got the S&P trading just under 5,900 again now, up by 0.5%. The 10-year at 4.42%, the 2-year 4.29%, gold up 1.8%, 26.09 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil is up 2.8%, 68.88 a barrel, and Bitcoin up 2.6%, 91,480 now on Bitcoin. Stocks rebounded after last week's slide as a rout in Treasuries abated, with 10-year yields approaching 4.5%. Traders also keeping a close eye on news around President-elect Donald Trump's administration. NVIDIA, which reports results this week, falling today after the information reported the chip giant has asked its suppliers to change the design of the server racks for its new Blackwell graphics processing unit due to an overheating problem. NVIDIA shares right now trading down by 1.75%. Recapping, the S&P up 28. That is a gain of 0.5% for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues now with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet with a look at the trading on this Monday as we get this week going. Thank you so much. But of course, the week in politics never really ended. It continued over the weekend with drama surrounding the still-to-come selection the president-elect Donald Trump will make as to who he would like to lead the Department of the Treasury. And we've kind of understood that there were two primary teams, if you will, in the running. One of them, those supporters of Howard Lutnick, who just happens to be helping lead Trump's transition effort. Elon Musk jumped in with support of Lutnick over the weekend. And then there's those who are supporting Scott Bessent of Key Square Group, including Kyle Bass of Heyman Management, who joined our colleagues on Bloomberg Surveillance earlier today with his why.
Global central bankers around the world have respect for Bessent and his views. Scott looks at the world, with a 4D chess overlay, meaning he understands geopolitics, he understands people, he understands exactly what investment flows and economic flows matter and don't matter.
Yet another reference to 4D chess in this conversation. We can't escape it. Trump is meeting, by the way, with Kevin Warsh this week at Mar-a-Lago, as Bloomberg reports that he is warming up to this idea, the youngest person to become a Federal Reserve governor. Laura Davison is in charge of all of our coverage here in the transition and U.S. politics. A pretty big job right now at Bloomberg. It's great to see you, as always. Laura, your thoughts on this horse race and why we're now adding names. You get the sense reading our coverage that Donald Trump is getting annoyed with Howard Lutnick and is tired about hearing all of this and is looking maybe for some new ideas.
Yeah, it's clear that he is not happy with the choices he had last week, which really were down to Bessent and Lutnick. There's some other folks that have continued to remain in the mix. Bob Lighthizer, for example, who was really his chief architect of all the tariff policies from the first term. But with the fact that we are now, a couple weeks into this, the team wanted to have this decision made last week. It's now Monday, and it doesn't look like we're close to a decision. It does not portend a really positive outcome here. Markets are starting to get a little bit worried, and it sort of signals signals that potentially economic policymaking in the first term could also be a little rocky.
Well, so do we have an understanding of whether this is just an issue of personalities, people who are advocating for themselves too much, perhaps too forcefully, as has been reported about Howard Lutnick, or are there actual policy questions that are making the president-elect more hesitant to make a selection?
It's really a mix of the two. Of you need to, you need to have the right mix of policies. You need to come forward, and there's been some concern, particularly among Bessent, that he may not be as a big advocate for the tariffs. He may be a little bit too cozy with Wall Street, too cozy with sort of kind of the mainstream financial mind. You also need to look the part. You need to do and say the right things when you go on TV. So there's Bessent went on Fox and Friends last week and came out, and Trump was reportedly not happy with how Bessent performed. So that really caused his stock to fall a little bit. Lutnick went too far. Went at the Madison Square Garden event. It was too rambunctious. Trump didn't like that either. So we keep seeing folks. Bill Haggerty, senator from Tennessee, was on Fox this morning talking about tax cuts. So you start to see some of these new names that are kind of trickling out from the woodwork.
This has devolved into some shouting matches. Apparently, Elon Musk had a high-volume conversation at Mar-a-Lago with some folks about this. And still waiting in the wings is Senator Bill Haggerty, which I find really interesting. The Republican from Tennessee, very quietly managing being on the short list here. Is he a real contender at this hour?
He is. He was someone who was also considered for State Department as well. He could have a big job. Trump has been reticent to pull too many people from the Senate because you do have sort of the lag of appointments. Basically the governor of that state would have to appoint someone to fill their seat, so that would delay his other appointees getting through the Senate. But we saw him pull Rubio. Tennessee is a Republican governor. It would be presumably a Trump ally that would go in. So if he needs to pull him, he certainly can.
Well, and when we spoke to Senator Haggerty just after the election, he did say our governor would make sure that my vacancy in the Senate would not be too much of a concern. He said any state with a strong Republican governor. So as we consider the decision-making timeline here, Laura, I know you said that they wanted to get this done last week. He's not inaugurated until January 20th. We still have a long transition window here. So why the rush and the resulting drama of this rush to try to get this choice out?
Part of it, they want to switch to focusing exclusively on policy. So if you have the personnel in place, suddenly people can then start working on the policies. Also, the Treasury job specifically needs to be picked first because all the other economic jobs flow from that. So the National Economic Director, whoever's going to lead the U.S. Trade Rep, all of this, then they can start building the whole economic house around that. You make a good point that Trump does not need to name anyone now. He has multiple months. Biden didn't name anyone this fast. Trump 1.0 didn't name anyone this fast. But it sort of feels like that because they've been naming people in such a quick clip that they need to, that this is taken forever. I'll remind you, the election wasn't even 2 weeks ago.
So true.
Well, that's a very good point. It's kind of like when you sprint at the beginning of a marathon and then everyone expects you to be able to keep that pace going, and maybe we're settling back into our distance pace. Laura Davison, Bloomberg Politics editor, thank you so much. It is noteworthy, though, as Laura talks about the fact that there's this whole economic team that needs to stem from the selection of the Treasury Department. The economy, in addition to the border, which Donald Trump kind of took care of first, he did nominate for DHS and other people who will be playing roles in immigration policy in this administration, hasn't yet gotten to one of the primary issues that he was campaigning on.
True enough. That's why so many people thought Treasury might be first.
Yeah.
But we're still talking about the National Economic Council, economic advisors in the White House. There's some big jobs, by the way, mentioned commerce as well. And all of these names could end up falling into those slots. Treasury will help to potentially unlock some of the rest of the economic team, you think?
All right, well, let's turn to our team, our political panel, at least today. Joining us is Caitlin Legacki. She is Democratic strategist and former senior advisor at the Department of Commerce, as well as Rick Davis, Republican strategist, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and Stone Court Capital partner. Rick, just to come to you first on this pacing question, Donald Trump obviously very early and very quickly started rolling out a laundry list of names for various roles. And now it feels like things are starting to slow down, at least when it comes to these economic selections. Is this a matter of us in the media who are anxious for this news, needing to reset our expectations of just how long this process really takes to get right?
A little bit, but I think it's a little bit of their own making. I mean, they came out of the box with so many aggressive major cabinet appointments almost immediately. You kind of were left with the impression that they already had their picks done, right? That they had started transition a long time ago, that it's just a matter of, are we going to win? And then this is the package that goes out the next day. And so, you were really creating that expectation down in Mar-a-Lago that, you've you've already figured all this stuff out, and you're ready to rock into a new administration. Donald Trump's picking up the phone, talking to world leaders all around, already engaging in the presidency even during a transition. So, yeah, I kind of thought there'd be more because I thought they had already figured it out. The fact that they hadn't is not a surprise. I mean, as we've been hearing on the program today, a lot of these appointments take some time, and some administrations have been downright slow getting appointments. Barack Obama drove people nuts, stretching some of this stuff out. So, yeah, I think we're off to a good start. Look, his White House staff is in very good shape. He's got that already figured out and announced. So that core component of who's going to run government is already there. I mean, I don't think people pay enough attention to that. In the last administration, Donald Trump's White House staff was much more powerful than any one cabinet member. And so this will be a strong presidency. So, yes, good to pay attention to cabinet members. But I think the White House staff is really where the decisions will get made.
As we spend so much time trying to figure out who will be next, who will win the game of survivor at the Treasury Department, so much focus on Matt Gaetz and Pete Hegseth, some of the controversies that have surrounded them. No one's talking about the Energy Department today, Caitlin Legacki. The Liberty Energy CEO, Chris Wright, has been tapped by Donald Trump. And as we try to figure out, what the next Trump administration will mean in terms of enacting new policies, we also can learn a lot about this appointment when we consider rolling back some of the Biden administration policies, beginning with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. This is an individual who is not only a fracking expert here and a fracking innovator. He was suggested by Harold Hamm when the process was underway at Mar-a-Lago. And he said on video last year, there is no climate crisis. We are not in the midst of an energy transition either. Some know him for drinking fracking fluid on camera in an effort to demonstrate its safety. The idea here that he's a missionary for the energy sector and will mean great change if, in fact, confirmed here. As the Democrat on our panel, what does that mean to you when you consider the undoing of policies already in place?
Yeah, there is significant concern among Democrats about protecting and preserving the Inflation Reduction Act. I think one of the things that has gone underreported is the importance of the technology neutral support for tax credits in the IRA, simply because the nominee for energy is more of an all of the above kind of energy guy. He's a geothermal investor. And so while he leans on fracking and traditional oil and gas, he also has a record of at least appreciating the business potential for diversified energy production. And so I think what you'll see is that a lot of Democrats are going to shift with this nomination, especially to focusing on the areas where we have common agreement and really trying to use that as a tool to leverage goodwill, build bridges, and try to protect the parts of the IRA that we can.
Well, so as we consider the fact that Donald Trump, Caitlin, did campaign on rolling back parts of the Inflation Reduction Act, he certainly campaigned on drill, baby, drill, and unleashing American energy, to use his words verbatim. He campaigned on a lot of things that we're now seeing come to fruition through his selection of those who will be in this administration. So as we call into question, and Joe alluded to this earlier, the scrutiny around some of these decisions like Matt Gaetz and others, and whether or not there is some strategy playing out here to get someone else in when those nominations potentially are not in fact confirmed. Is that really what you're seeing, or is Donald Trump just making good on everything he suggested that he would? This is all cards on the table, face up.
Yeah, I absolutely think that he is testing the boundaries of what he can get away with. And then once he gets a sense of what those boundaries are, he may adjust. But I think he is truly banking on the fact that now that he has another Republican trifecta with the House and the Senate, that congressional Republicans will do, his will. And so I actually think he wants Matt Gaetz at DOJ. He wants Hegseth at the Pentagon, and he wants RFK at HHS. And so Democrats are really going to have to be strategic about where they focus their objections and driving opposition to his nominees, because we're only going to get a couple shots at having serious conversations. And we're going to have to be really focused about where we want to raise awareness and push back.
Rick, I think it's interesting, the reporting by the New York Times that Robert Lighthizer is out as Treasury Secretary because he's too pro-tariff for the stock market. That would suggest that there's a competition of ideas when it comes to the economy inside the Trump camp that we might not talk too much about. Donald Trump says tariff's the most beautiful word, the greatest word in the dictionary and so forth, but he's clearly aware that there is a point of diminishing returns when it comes to the stock market. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that you've got to sort of deconstruct the Trump economic policy strategy, right? I mean, he is a tax cutter at the core, right? The fundamentals of his plans in 2017 was to enact the largest broad-based tax cut that he could for both corporations and individuals. And out of that came the Trump tax cuts of 17. And then he used tariffs as a negotiating tactic, especially with Europe and China. And so it's not that I think he thinks that tariffs in and amongst itself are economic policy, but a tool of economic policy to extract from whoever he's negotiating with, whether it's one of the countries in Europe or China or any other location, whatever other items that he's going to need on trade policy. And so and now there's this new concept that's been floated that and it's a revenue raiser. So to offset additional tax cuts, you're going to need ways of raising revenue. And so that goes into the spike on tariff discussions. And so all of these things are sort of tools that Donald Trump himself wants to be able to turn up or turn down based on who he's talking to. He's a bilateral negotiator. Everybody around the world is going to be getting a phone call from Donald Trump if he wants something directly. He is not going to work through NATO, the European Union, BRICS, all these different organizations that are multilateral represent to him diffusion of U.S. leverage, and he wants that leverage. And so I really think that it's too complex the way Donald Trump looks at it to think that these things are, these economic policies are in and amongst itself, sort of sacrosanct as to how he uses them. He'll dial them up and dial them down based on what he's trying to extract.
Great panel and a great conversation with Rick Davis and Caitlin Legacki. Thank you both so much for the insights. With breaking news now on the terminal, we expected it, and here it is. Congestion pricing, indeed, it has been approved. The MTA board approving the revised price of $9 for a toll. Kaylee, you're going to have to find somewhere else to park north of 60th Street.
I guess so, at least starting in January.
Yes.
Remember, this was initially put on hold in June, but now $9 will be the fee, at least for 3 years. It could potentially go higher beyond that time frame, but we'll have more ahead here on Bloomberg.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Looking at a mixed market, the Dow down 10 right now. The S&P up 26. A little changed on the Dow. The S&P up 0.5%. NASDAQ up 122, up 0.7%. 10-year at 4.42%. The 2-year right now 4.30%. Gold up $44 the ounce, up 1.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude 69 even, up just about 2.95%. And Bitcoin surging 2.6%, 91,478 on Bitcoin. Congestion pricing in Manhattan as a go. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority approving a revised congestion pricing plan for Manhattan that President-elect Donald Trump has threatened to terminate once he takes office. The board of the MTA, which runs the city's transit system and is implementing the new toll, voted today to begin the program. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. Back we go to Washington. Once again, Balance of Power continues with your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much, bringing us the latest headlines, not just in terms of what's moving financial markets, but also what's impacting our audience here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And for many of you, it is that congestion pricing plan. $9 toll will be going into effect in January. But as Charlie just mentioned, the president-elect doesn't like this very much, and he too will be taking office on January 20th, so we'll see how long this lasts. But before, of course, Donald Trump can be inaugurated for a second time, there is an administration currently in place that has to finish out. Joe Biden right now, Joe, is doing one of the last final summits of his presidency in terms of meeting with other countries around the world. He is currently in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, at the G20 summit.
Joe Biden's final G20, which is a big deal for a president, of course, who surrounded himself with foreign policy and wanted that to be the thrust of his administration, making the rounds not only at this G20 APEC a couple of days ago, where he met in a bilateral meeting with President Xi of China. Really interesting. Did you see him in the rainforest over the weekend as well? He went to the Amazon. He's checking boxes, and this is typically what you see toward the end of an administration, and in his case, taking trips that he just wasn't able to make earlier, remembering that we were in the throes of a pandemic when he took office. But as he touches down in Rio, and they pose today for the family photo, we have activated our asset, David Gura, traveling with the president, and joins us now from Rio. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, there's no mistaking where David Gura is today. David, it's great to have you with us and appreciate the reporting here and a grisly assignment for you abroad. But in all seriousness, talk to us about what this president can actually produce, unless this is just a farewell tour.
Well, it's both. It is a farewell tour, and he's taking this moment to meet with leaders that he's worked with over these last 4 years, and before that, when he was vice president and working in the Senate as well. He's somebody who has cultivated and maintained relationships with world leaders for a very long time, and really espouses and talks about the benefits of having multilateral gatherings like this. This is a relatively new one, got its start back in 2008, and has persisted. It takes on a different flavor no matter where it is, but Joe Biden has been a stalwart at gatherings like these. So there is that farewell tour element. The other part is just trying to lay what he can in terms of connective tissue from this administration to the next. He's talking about all that he's achieved over the course of the last 4 years, whether that's with the relationship between the U.S. and China, or with environmental policy. As you mentioned, he went to the Amazon, the first U.S. president to do that. He's trying to make sure that there's a seamless transition. We talk about the political transition, but a policy one as well. Now, of course, come January, a lot of that could be scuttled from the moment that Donald Trump takes office. He's made no secret of the fact that when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine, for instance, or that in the Middle East, he thinks he can solve that by taking an entirely different tack very quickly. I think we see Joe Biden here doing as best he can to lay good groundwork for the continuation of a lot of these relationships and a lot of these policies, but also a Joe Biden who is aware that in these final 2 months of his presidency, there are limits to what he's able to do.
All right, Bloomberg correspondent David Gura live in Rio for us. Thank you so much. Where, of course, the G20 is taking place. Meanwhile, over the weekend, of course, as Joe alluded to, it was the APEC summit in Peru, also in South America. And on the sidelines of that summit, Joe Biden sat down for the third time of his presidency with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And while they did have some progress in regard to artificial intelligence not being used in terms of nuclear power, a lot of it was forward-looking as well. because there is an incoming administration, and Xi Jinping outlined 4 red lines he hopes that Donald Trump does not cross. So for more now, we want to turn to Jane Harman, who is with us. She is chair of the National Defense Strategy Commission and former ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congresswoman, thanks for being here. Those 4 red lines that she talked about include moving to undermine the Communist Party's grip on power, pushing the nation toward democracy, containing its economic rise, or encouraging independence in Taiwan. When you look forward to the incoming Trump administration, do you think any of those lines will be crossed?
Well, the titles, taglines are pretty general. So within that can fit a lot of different things. I think that President-elect Trump will want to resume his personal relationship with President Xi. I think he is not a huge fan of Taiwan independence, and that's not U.S. policy. So let's go there. Taiwan has a separate government and its own democracy, but it is not breaking off. We still have a one China policy. And on the other things, it depends how you define democracy and et cetera, et cetera. I think that there is reason to hope, despite all the China bashing, that the Trump administration will have a thoughtful view toward China, which is competition, confrontation, and cooperation where possible. And I do think that the suggested Secretary of State will be a person of great experience. And I think we should be happy that Marco Rubio is the pick. So I would say I'm somewhat optimistic. Yes, these are warning flags. But, oh, by the way, I do want to applaud, I hope you're going to ask me about this, the move that was just announced to let Ukraine finally use long-range weapons and attack military targets. And I would hope, frankly, North Korean targets in Russia. I mean, this North Korea's presence is new news. And if Trump really wants to, as he says he does, settle the Ukraine-Russia conflict in a day, unlikely, Ukraine has to be in the strongest possible position. And this is something that should have been permitted months and months ago.
Well, let's go there, Jane, and it's great to see you. This is an important development in Ukraine, and as we've seen repeatedly, it's no, 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 then maybe, then it gets to be yes, in this case with the use of ATACMS in the Kursk region. Why is it only Kursk, and why now? Why so late?
Well, I don't know why so late. I don't know why it took so long to get the ATACMS into Ukraine. As you know, I chaired this Commission on National Defense Strategy. We went to Ukraine. I've been there twice this year. And it was very clear to us that not only were these weapons in Europe, but they should have been transferred long ago. I would hope that Ukraine will also attack military targets. Let's understand what's going on as winter descends on the region. The Russians, in the cruelest act, are trying to take out the energy grid in Ukraine and a lot of civilian facilities. They're attacking Ukrainian cities. They're not just attacking the Ukrainian military. How is this going to end well? It could end well if, and I'm not talking for the Ukrainians, they have to make the settlement, but let's just imagine some territory is ceded to Russia. Let's just imagine, thought experiment, not recommending it, but also Ukraine has a clear path to NATO membership. That might have legs. And that's something that Trump might do. I know that he is very doubtful about Ukraine, about NATO as a military alliance. But let's imagine that he doesn't do this and Russia moves into Europe on his watch. And let's imagine that Europeans, who are now very scared, move away from us. I don't think that's a picture that President-elect Trump would want. So there is a path. Bravo to President Biden for finally moving down that path to make Ukraine stronger right now.
Well, not everyone is pleased with going down that road, Jane. Congressman Thomas Massie, who's a member of the House Freedom Caucus, posted on X, by authorizing long-range missiles to strike inside Russia, Biden is committing an unconstitutional act of war that endangers the lives of all U.S. citizens. This is an impeachable offense, he says. What do you say in response?
I smile. Impeachable offense. I think we've been down that road a couple of times with President-elect Trump. I think Biden is within his power to authorize this. It's been recommended by many experts, much more expert than I for a long time. True, there was pushback in Biden's National Security Council, also by some important journalists like David Ignatius, whom I respect and admire. But I think this is the right call. And of course, some of the Trump sympathizers would scream because in case it hurts Russia, I think that may be on their playbook, not to hurt Russia. Well, on my playbook is to defend the independent sovereign state of Ukraine, which Russia promised to defend, to respect in 1994 when Ukraine gave up its nukes. And as a member of the UN, the UN Charter says all states shall respect the sovereignty of other states. I also think in the end, it is more dangerous to the US not to do this than to do it for reasons I said. If Putin ends up in Europe, we will be either drawn into war under Article 5 of NATO or certainly be threatened by further expansion of the Russian Federation.
Well, all the while, Russia hit Ukraine with more than 200 missiles on Sunday. It was the biggest attack, the biggest combined missile and drone attack that we've seen in months. To what extent are we going to see Vladimir Putin step up military attacks in advance of Donald Trump taking office?
Why shouldn't they? They were doing it anyway. So let's not assume this is in any way directly connected to Trump. But oh, by the way, we're now learning that there are phone calls which are not reported through the normal diplomatic channels, or alleged phone calls, reported phone calls between the president-elect and President Putin, and certainly between Elon Musk, who is the buddy-in-chief, and President Putin. It's important that our foreign policy have some guardrails and that we understand what's being said in case it's distorted later. It's very easy for that to happen and for Putin to claim a 180-degree opposite conversation if it's useful to him. Let me just make one other point because we were talking about China. China has, I think, made clear to Russia, as we have, that the use of nukes, even on tipped on missiles, is out of bounds. And I sure hope that China will keep the pressure on Russia not to do this. That's been another Putin threat. And we've said it's a red line. I think maybe we should retire the use of red lines and get into a better form of muscular diplomacy defending U.S. interests. And that's why I'm so bullish on this decision that President Biden has just made about the use of ATACMS to attack, I would say, not only the North Korean troops, but I would say military installations that are lobbying all of this stuff to hurt civilian targets in Ukraine.
Jane, it's great to have you, as always. Jane Harman, chair of the National Defense Strategy Commission. We always learn something when we speak with Jane Harman, and it's great to have your insights today with developments coming from both sides. In this particular case, Kayleigh Lyons, we're going to turn our attention, though, to domestic policy coming up. We have a funding deadline on December 20th. No one's talking about a government shutdown. They probably will as we get closer. But there are a lot of questions about the form this might take, how far kicking the can might bring relief to Donald Trump, or if they want to, quote, clear the decks, as we've been hearing from more lawmakers, to get into some real budgeting at the end of this year. We'll see.
Yeah, Sarah Chamberlain of the Republican Main Street Partnership will join us to weigh in on that next. Are we going to get an omnibus, a CR, or something else? Stay tuned to find out. This is Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We're looking at a down day for the Dow Jones Industrial Average right now, down 59, a decline of just about 0.1%. We've got the S&P pushing higher, up 22 points right now. That is a gain of 0.4%, while NASDAQ is up 109, a gain of 0.6%. 10-year at 4.41%, the 2-year 4.28%. Spot gold right now up $45 the ounce, up 1.8%. Gold back at $26.08 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 3.1%, $69.14 for a barrel of WTI. So again, U.S. stocks, they are trading mixed with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ right now. We've got the S&P and NASDAQ both higher. Dow Jones Industrial Average is trading lower by 0.1%. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority has approved a revised congestion pricing plan for Manhattan that President-elect Donald Trump has threatened to terminate once he takes office. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lines alongside Joe Matthew in Washington, but we want to bring you a live look now, if you're joining us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where, of course, the G20 summit is underway, and the family photo is taking place as we speak. The leaders, of course, Joe, all assembled there in South America for what is the final G20 of Joe Biden's presidency. He's in there somewhere. We just can't quite see him yet.
Yes, he is. Consider the choreography. You've got, there we go, for our viewers on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube. We'll get a bit of a pan of the world leaders here, the family photo at what is Joe Biden's last G20. It's been a weekend of farewells and bilateral meetings. Kaylee, he was at the APEC summit where you might have seen the other family photo over the weekend. He visited the Amazon to become the first president of the United States to do so, and now at the G20 with fellow world leaders. Many have questions about what is going to happen next. Of course, Kaylee, I'm alluding to the presidential cycle here in the incoming Trump administration, but some work needs to be done before we get that far. As we consider the funding deadline on December 20th, the Farm Bill, the NDAA, lawmakers are back and the lame duck is quacking.
Yeah, we have a clock we're working with here. It may not be ticking, it may be quacking instead, but December 20th is coming up pretty fast. That is the funding deadline after we kicked the can down the road. Remember, originally, everything's supposed to be sorted out by the end of the fiscal year. That's September 30th. It wasn't. So here we are, end of the year, before the new Congress comes in and the new president takes the oath of office. They have to figure out what exactly they want to do. Will they kick the can down the road? Or will they actually pass the requisite bills in whatever form, whatever package, to start fresh in the new Congress? The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, talked about the options on Fox yesterday.
We're running out of clock. December 20th is the deadline. We're still hopeful that we might be able to get that done. But if not, we'll have a temporary measure, I think, that would go into the first part of next year and allow us the necessary time to get this done. And I think that would be ultimately a good move because the country would benefit from it, because then you'd have Republican control and we'd have a little more say in what those spending bills are.
So it sounds like we've got three camps here. Regular order, get it done by the end of the year, maybe bring us into March. There's another idea of going all the way to September to clear the decks, they say, for Donald Trump. What clears the decks, though? Keeping him free of having to write a budget here or go through the process, or giving him influence over the final product? Sarah Chamberlain joins us to talk about this and a lot more. We're lucky to have Sarah in person here on the early edition of Balance of Power. President, CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Great to see you.
Happy
Thank
to
you
be
for
here.
coming
Thank
in
you.
as always. Let's just pick through a couple of important buckets here, and we'll start with funding and the preference of Main Street members. You've got a menu of options here, and of course we all remember the desire to get back to regular order by the end of this year. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. The Senate has got its issues, and the House has got a few of its own as well. Do we do a short term? Are we going to be talking about an omnibus? Where are we here?
So the members would like to get back to regular order, but they've run out of time. So they will end up doing a short-term CR probably until early March at this point, just to get something through and to make sure the government does not shut down.
Well, and that obviously seems to be the team the speaker is on as well. Is this therefore also the team that the former president is on, or the president-elect now? This will be what he is inheriting when he sits down in the Oval Office in January.
I think he's going to be fine with that. I think that's probably his preference. That way he can create new spending bills starting next year as he takes over in January.
Does he worry about this stuff? We obsess over this in regular order and how are we going to fund? There are defense hawks who are really concerned that the Pentagon might not get what it needs on time. Does Donald Trump think that way when it comes to the wonky part of Washington?
No, he just wants to get this year over with, get sworn in, and start fresh. He's a long-term or short-term CR is just fine with him.
Yeah.
I don't think he spends much time worrying about it. He's starting, he's setting up his cabinet. He's got a lot of things going on besides this. He's leaving this to the Congress.
Well, and we know the Congress has had issues with even just getting a CR passed in the past. In fact, that's one of the reasons Speaker McCarthy lost his job last fall. So when we consider that notion that there are going to be members of the Republican conference who will not vote for a continuing resolution no matter what, Democrats will once again be required here. But after being dealt a blow in the election, are they going to be in the mood to cooperate?
No, they won't be. But the hope is they don't want to be here at Christmas either. It kind of, to be honest with you, running up against the holidays is a huge asset to get something done. There will be some compromises done, and I think you'll see few Democrats, not a majority of them, but a few crossover. But we talked about Trump. Maybe Donald Trump can control, President Trump can control some of the right wing and encourage them to vote for the CR. He wants this done. He wants to have a fresh start after inauguration. So with hopes, maybe he can talk to them and get them to vote for it. I don't know. A lot of them have lost or moved on to different jobs, frankly, come January.
Sounds like Mike Johnson's life is getting a lot easier, though, to be honest. He maintains the majority. Donald Trump gets the Freedom Caucus off of his back. He can actually maybe get something done here a little bit. And I wonder where you are with the rest of the lame duck session beyond funding. We're talking about a farm bill. They say kick the can. We're talking about the NDAA. This is pretty important to get done by the end of the year, at least setting our priorities for military spending. Where does that go?
I think the priorities will be set, but I don't see a farm bill or NDAA actually getting passed. The only thing that's really going to get done is the CR to get everything into next year. Probably if Harris had won, we'd be in a little bit different situation. But now that it's President Trump coming in, I think that he's going to want to start fresh. Okay. So he'll start with the new farm bill. The farm bill, I realize, has been years hoping to get it passed.
That's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one. It needs to get done this next cycle for sure.
Well, if the only thing that's really getting done is the CR, I do wonder if other things could be attached to it besides just a continuation of existing funding. Like, for example, what the White House is requesting today, almost $100 billion in disaster relief after the hurricanes we saw just a few months ago. Is that likely to happen?
There's a strong possibility because, frankly, in some of the more extreme members of Congress, the more we call them the exotics, some of the damage is in their districts. Right. So I would think that they will want to make sure this gets added, and it might be the reason that they do vote for it ultimately, and maybe we won't need as many Democrats.
There's a question about funding for mass deportation. If this is something that Donald Trump plans to do on day one, as he likes to say, it's going to cost money to get law enforcement together to round up thousands, maybe millions of people. I don't know how many we're talking about, what would be the first phase, to pay for military involvement, transportation to get them out of the country. Is that something that Congress will actually have to manage here in the near term?
They will have to manage it, but I actually don't see a problem with that. Yeah. They are going to give President Trump the revenue he needs to get this done. I mean, this is a big initiative for the president in the first 100 days. They'll give him the money to start.
Is that supplemental, or are they steering money from the border elsewhere to make that happen?
They have not decided on that yet. It'd probably be supplemental, though.
That'd be a big deal for this Congress, wouldn't it?
Be a big deal. We've never undertaken anything quite like this.
Have you heard a number?
Not yet.
Wow.
That will be a discussion this week.
Well, and certainly a discussion, I would imagine, within the Appropriations Committee and the Budget Committee as well, the ones that deal with finances. I do want to ask you, though, about a couple of committees, and specifically the Foreign Affairs Committee, because the current chair, Mike McCall, has decided not to seek a waiver. He, of course, was term limited. He decided not to push that and try to get an exception. So who's going to chair it now in his absence, Sarah?
Okay, so that's good. Michael McCall's a member of Main Street, just for full disclosure. I don't know. I think there's going to be a little bit of a fight. Steering committee will have to make some tough choices, but it doesn't look like any of them are going to get any waivers. So you've got transportation infrastructure. You have a few committees in the same situation. I think that the waivers have probably come to an end. A couple got them last cycle, but I think it's over for this cycle. So you're going to see a bunch of new committee chairmen.
When does the outreach from the speaker to the minority leader begin? Are they constantly talking? Is there a Cold War with Mike Johnson and Hakeem Jeffries, knowing that once we get through the new year and everybody's in place, they're probably going to need each other quite a bit, as we've been seeing over the last year?
Well, they've been talking since the speaker took over as the speaker, so I don't anticipate anything has changed. They continue to speak. It's a very, very tight majority.
Sure
and
is.
now with some of the sitting members going off to the cabinet and other positions, the majority shrunk even more. So they're really going to have to rely on each other to get legislation
They're stuck with
through.
each other.
They
Do
are
they
stuck
like
with
each
each other for a while. They seem to like each other, yes, very much so. They speak highly. And if you remember, the Democrats saved the speaker a few months ago.
That's right.
So I think that they have a good working relationship.
In a way that they were not willing to do with Kevin McCarthy.
That
So
was
it does
not a
seem-
great working relationship there. This one is much better.
Well, it certainly wasn't a great working relationship between Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz, because Matt Gaetz is the one who ultimately activated the motion to vacate against McCarthy. I do want to ask you about Gaetz, though. Obviously no longer a member. But according to the reporting today, the House Ethics Committee that was investigating him, getting ready to issue a report, will be meeting on that on Wednesday, voting on whether or not to make it public. Do the Main Street Republicans want that to be public?
Actually, the chairman is a member of Main Street, Michael Guest. So I think that they would like it to be public for many different reasons. But I think we need to know, what is in there? I mean, obviously, Justice Department dropped their investigation. What did the Ethics Committee
So
find?
even though the speaker says it would set a bad precedent, he isn't necessarily representing the majority view in that?
I don't believe so, and certainly the senators have asked for it. Republican senators have asked for it to be released. You may see something. Maybe it's an abbreviated part, but I think you're going to see something be released.
Pretty remarkable that we're having this conversation right now, and a lot of people seem to think there's something else going on, that Donald Trump is strategizing here. He's got a sacrificial nominee to make somebody else look good. But the refrain we've been hearing over the past couple of days is, no, he really means it, and he expects John Thune to get these nominees passed. Is that how you see it?
So I think he expects most of the nominees to get through. Matt Gaetz could be a bridge too far. I'm not sure on that one. I guess President Trump really would like him to be in that position, but whether or not the senators are going to go along with that, that's $1 million question. Matt Gaetz, he's made some enemies in both the House and the Senate side. So we'll see if he can really get the votes. I know a couple of the senators have already come out and say it's very questionable if they'll vote for him. It's very tight margin over there as well. So if he loses 3 or 4, he will not be confirmed. I don't see a huge issue with the other ones being confirmed, though.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you. Can they really only choose one to not let through when they've pledged, not just expeditiously, but to make sure that Donald Trump has the people around him that he wants around him?
I think they can choose 1 or 2 to block. I mean, it's their prerogative. I mean, I realize President Trump wants all these people, but, it's up to the Senate. And if Matt Gaetz is a bridge too far, they will make that decision. And then Donald Trump, I'm sure, will have somebody else in line.
I'm sure you saw Mike Johnson on the plane. They had a little McDonald's. They went to a UFC fight. It was, Ferris Bueller's day off for Mike Johnson, going out on the town with Donald Trump, Elon Musk and company. There's the image that was tweeted over the weekend as they're all tucking into their McDonald's value meals. Is he going to be in the White House a lot? What is the relationship going to be like once Donald Trump is here? Because he's been at Mar-a-Lago, I feel like, more than Washington.
He has. He's been there a great deal. It's good to have the speaker and the president-elect have a good relationship. They do. They like each other. So I don't see a problem. And they have to work together. Again, margins are going to be very close in both the House and the Senate. So they have to work very closely.
How's the relationship between the speaker and the incoming majority leader in the Senate, John Thune?
They speak regularly as well. I mean, it wasn't a surprise that Senator Thune was selected. It was kind of anticipated for the last few months. So they've been building a relationship.
It's not often we get this much time with Sarah Chamberlain. When lawmakers come into town tonight, they talk to you, they get together, and you're mapping out the next couple of weeks. What's the biggest question that you're going to hear tonight?
CR. Is absolutely the biggest.
Duration.
And the other thing is, so Main Street has a policy side and a political side. We're also starting to talk about who will be replacing the House members that are leaving. Elise Stefanik is a Main Street member. Walsh is a Main Street member. So who are the members there? And of course, including Gates's. Maybe we can get that into a more Main Street type conservative district. So we're looking at that as well. Like, who do you know down there who wants to run for Congress? Because we won't have a lot of time to get moving on these seats, because we have to fill these seats as soon as possible.
Which makes Sarah Chamberlain of the Republican Main Street Partnership an incredibly busy woman, so we're lucky you could share some time with us today, Sarah. Thank you so much. There's a lot that they got to get done in the next month, really.
You said it, absolutely. And Sarah Chamberlain is going to be making some phone calls, it sounds like, not just for this session, but for the next one as well. Fascinating conversation from the view of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Kaylee will meet you on the late edition of Balance of Power. That's at 5 p.m. Washington time. You're on Bloomberg.
I'm the owner, I have a family office and the company called Company I Limited. I also have a live streaming channel for startups. It's SG Trader, so we let startups to pitch investment community on our channel. I give them 3-minute pitch. We publish their video on our channel, and everybody who is interested, please welcome to send me your video, and I will roll for almost a month your video for all financial community. The channel is live, it's streaming live 5 days a week, from morning till night.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator. Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, it's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
Well, I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
Hi, I'm Laurie Haynes, CEO and co-founder of Shirar, and I'm really excited to tell you that we are going to be raising funds for Shirar again. Successful raise in 2023, it's time to scale.
We hope that you enjoy the pitch deck and the financial model. Any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us, and we can't wait for you to be part of Shirar.
More over the next hour. First up, though, a check of the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We are looking at a mixed day for the U.S. stock market. Right now, we have got the S&P 500 index trading lower, trading higher on the S&P, down for the Dow. I begin there, lower now by 54 points, down 0.1%. The S&P up 25, up by about 0.4%. NASDAQ up 124. That is a gain of 0.7%. The Russell 2000 index up now by 0.2%. 10-year at 4.41%. The 2-year 4.28%. Gold up $48 the ounce to $26.11 for gold. That is a gain of 1.9%. West Texas Intermediate crude now up 3.2%, $69.19 a barrel. And Bitcoin holding above 90,000, 90,322, up now by just about 1.3%. Sources tell Bloomberg members of President-elect Donald Trump's transition team have told advisors they plan to make a federal framework for self-driving vehicles one of the Transportation Department's priorities. That word has Tesla stock up now by 5%. As for other EV makers, Rivian up by 2%, Ford shares up 2.2%, GM, though, in the red, down by about 0.8%. So again, recapping here, we do have stocks trading mixed with the S&P 500 index right now up 25, up 0.4, the Dow lower by 0.1%. In New York, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority has approved a revised congestion plan for Manhattan that President-elect Donald Trump has threatened to terminate once he takes office. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, you can always check out Bloomberg wherever you get your podcast. Check out Bloomberg News Now. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Charlie. Thank you so much. Well, the G20 Summit of World Leaders underway in Rio de Janeiro, and already Chinese officials are irritated by human rights comments. Already the wife of Brazil's President da Silva has cursed at Elon Musk, and already lots of side conversations about Ukraine and also about President-elect Donald Trump. So let's get to it. Let's head to Rio. Bloomberg News correspondent and host of the Big Take podcast, David Gora, is on the ground at the G20 Summit. Yep, David, it looks like you're on vacation. We know you are working hard. Top of mind, top of agenda. We're seeing a lot of headlines. We've got a live blog on it. Lots going on. But what's kind of front and center at this hour?
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine was not formally part of this agenda, but that's something that's really taken the mantle from a lot of other issues over the course of these last few hours. Obviously, so much has developed in that story in recent days, starting with that attack on Ukraine, a phone call that the German chancellor had with Vladimir Putin of Russia, and then the United States' decision to allow Ukrainian forces to use sophisticated U.S. weapons to attack Russians on Russian territory. So that's kind of loomed large over conversations that are happening on the sidelines here at the G20 in Rio, and it's kind of led to some fighting over the communique, the statement that these nations are going to put out at the end of this event, sort of how specific they should be both about that conflict and the one in the Middle East. And then you ask what else is looming large. We just had this family photograph taken here, and this is a funny thing that happens at these multilateral conferences where all the participants come together, they march out on stage. There's a great deal of choreography, a lot of effort that goes into sort of placing people next to one another or far away from each other, as the case may be. It seems that President Biden didn't make that photo opportunity, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau didn't either. So we're trying to figure out why that was the case, what held them up, but a little added drama to something that might seem like something that's superficial, but actually is kind of a marquee part of gatherings like this.
It's like family squabbles or what?
We'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, tell us more about what happened there.
We're trying to figure that out. I mean, President Biden, Prime Minister Trudeau had a series of bilateral meetings with other leaders over the course of the day, so schedules for them, as they are for lots of people here, are packed. It could have just been a scheduling oversight, but there was a lot of effort that went into sort of, as I said, the placement of people in that photograph going forward here. I mean, a unique thing about the G20 is it's not a group of allies. There are countries here that disagree with one another and have different priorities when it comes to geopolitics. So Russia, for instance, is a participant in the G20, a member of the G20. Vladimir Putin declined to come to this gathering, saying he'd be a distraction were he to come. But his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, is here in town. So there's some challenges there with the optics. Who wants to be placed next to him in that photograph? And then just a lot of conversation about sort of who might be where and what that might indicate about sort of their place on the global stage. So I promise we're continuing to look into it as long with our colleagues here in Rio, but certainly a fascinating wrinkle to that story this afternoon.
Absolutely. Hey, listen, I'm curious, going back to Ukraine, if we may, should we assume that we're going to see American missiles in Russia, and what does that signal? An end to the war, an escalation of the war? What does that potentially kind of mean? I'm just curious if the conversations that might be on the sidelines about that.
So I think that the backdrop to this is Joe Biden is reckoning with the fact that he has just a couple of months left in office, and what he said explicitly is that he wants to give Ukraine as much as it needs in terms of resources and ammunition to continue to fight that war and fight for its freedom. Now, there was a briefing this morning for reporters by the Deputy National Security Advisor in which he was really trying to be kind of circumspect about what that might mean and sort of how this might work. And obviously, this is something that Ukraine has wanted for a very long time, Carol. They've wanted access to more sophisticated weaponry to try to hold Russia back. The U.S. has been wary of that. So have a lot of allies, wondering how that would escalate this war if the West were to become more actively involved in it. So it seems like we're likely to see that to a very tailored degree, how they might be used, where they might be used. These are things that are being hashed out. But really something that's changed over the course of the weekend, yes, was that attack on Ukraine because of its severity, but also this announcement that North Korean troops are now going to be fighting for Russia in that battle in Ukraine. That's something that's just been flat out unpalatable to a lot of leaders here in Rio and indeed around the world, allies of Ukraine.
All right, great stuff, David, as always. Bloomberg News correspondent David Gora, who will be back again with us with an update in the next hour. All right, now we do want to get to one thing that is certainly top mind for world leaders at G20 and elsewhere. DJT, Donald J. Trump's administration and cabinet picks, chief among them who will take the job of U.S. Treasury Secretary.
Yeah, it's kind of turning into this Game of Thrones, and that's where we go now to jockeying around the selection for the nation's next Treasury Secretary. Bloomberg Businessweek national correspondent Josh Green joins us on that, and on his Businessweek story on the president-elect's impossible task. Josh is the author of Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump and the Nationalist Uprising, and the Rebels, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the struggle for a new American politics.
All right, Josh, great to have you here. Josh joining us from our Bloomberg Washington, D.C. bureau. Hey, Josh, first up, I want to ask you about the pick for Treasury Secretary, or the process, the behind the scenes. A super important job. Wall Street is watching. The world is watching. What are you hearing about this process?
Yeah, I'd put process in quotes, first of all. I mean, it's turned out into like an absolute bloodbath with competing candidates stabbing each other in the back. And what you have now is, a list of people who are under consideration: Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent, Robert Lighthizer, the former trade representative. None of them has been named. There's a lot of jockeying going on behind the scenes. Trump himself doesn't seem to be happy with any of the candidates. And as we report in Bloomberg, he's very unhappy that these fights have spilled out into public view. So the latest we're hearing is that Trump is sort of casting about for somebody who would fill what he thinks is the role of Treasury Secretary, meaning somebody big, powerful, respected by Wall Street. Some of the names we're hearing and have reported: Mark Rowan of Apollo, Kevin Warsh, the former Fed governor. There are other dark horse names floating around. But right now, everybody in Washington is trying to figure out, where the musical chairs will stop and who will wind up in that very important position.
Is it hard to find somebody who's respected by Wall Street but also believes what Donald Trump believes when it comes to tariffs, Josh?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the tension. Trump can certainly find someone like a Lighthizer who really believes in the use of tariffs, but as a number of sources told us, Wall Street would panic if somebody who was seen as too extreme on tariffs gets in there. On the other hand, you have guys with sterling reputations who would be embraced, I think, by Wall Street, both a Warsh or a Bessent, somebody like that, who may not be as willing to come out and embrace a steep tariff regime of the type that Trump has bandied about. knowing that the damage that could potentially cause to markets if they were implemented, and disrupted a lot of things in the global markets. And so it's tough to find just the right candidate who has both the stature, the wealth, the name that Trump wants, and also the willingness to do Trump's bidding.
Hey, Josh, we have not had a chance to talk to you about the election outcome. You really wrote the book on understanding Donald Trump's first run at the White House and his win that time around. What do you make of him winning a second term?
Well, I think it was a surprise to a lot of people, but in a lot of ways, it's a much more impressive victory than his win in 2016, which took a lot of people by surprise. He did not win a majority of the popular vote that time. Looks almost certain that he will this time. And I think what's most important is the coalition that Trump put together in winning the 2024 election. There were both the kind of high wattage billionaire supporters, people like Howard Lutnick and Elon Musk. But on the other hand, Trump cobbled together a really racially diverse working class coalition that we hadn't seen the last time around. A lot of voters that traditionally vote Democrat were persuaded to come over and vote for Trump. And as a result, he has a really big coalition, as I write about in the new issue of Business Week. Trump has pursued this kind of what I call plutocratic populism. And I think the main tension in his second presidency is going to be how to balance the interests of working class people with the interests of the billionaires and Wall Street crowd, who are another important coalition for him.
So let's talk a little bit about that, Josh, because you came with receipts, you have the numbers here. Why is that an impossible task? Why is he unable to do that and make good on really every promise that he made on the campaign trail?
Well, if you look at exit poll numbers, and just in my own interviews with undecided voters and people who are Trump supporters, a lot of what drove Trump's support was voter anger, especially working class voter anger over inflation, high prices, for which they blamed Kamala Harris personally. They didn't want her back in there. They remember the Trump era, rightly or wrongly, as a time of lower prices, lower inflation, strong paychecks for everybody, and so they voted for Trump in the hopes that he would bring that back. But if you look at what some of Trump is planning to do, the first item on his agenda looks to be extending his 2017 tax cuts and maybe even cutting corporate taxes deeper than he did the first time around, which would be very exciting to his Wall Street contingent, to his billionaire contingent, but it could certainly help exacerbate inflation, as could a steep round of tariffs. So on the one hand, you could satisfy one half of the coalition, but if the cost of that was for prices, inflation, and interest rates to rise again, then a lot of the same working class voters who supported him 2 weeks ago could potentially turn on him and Republicans in the midterm elections and hand power back to the Democrats.
Hey, how much do you think, though, Donald J. Trump thinks about the midterms at this point? All right, I mean, essentially, right? This is his second term. He's a lame duck president. He can do a lot of stuff, and he's got a Congress. But how much do you think he thinks about what happens at midterms versus following through on his mandate?
It's a great question, Carol. It's one I've asked to some people around him, and the truthful answer I got is he doesn't really care at all. What he cares about is his approval rating. He'd like to have a booming stock market the way he did in his first term. And so part of the thinking in Trump world is that even if he did promote someone to Treasury Secretary who got behind this tariff regime and things went badly in the economy, if the market were to fall, that might be a kind of disciplining mechanism for Trump to step back a little bit, because he really does view the stock market, the S&P, as a kind of verdict on the success or failure of his presidency. But certainly thinking about the fortunes of congressional Republicans in 2026 is probably not top of mind for Donald Trump right now.
That's interesting to hear. Why do you think that is? Because it sort of does provide, to a certain extent, a check on what he's able to do. Because if he puts policies into place that are unpopular among his base, then he could really pay a price in the midterms.
Yeah, he could. I mean, I've gotten a couple answers from that in my reporting. One is that Trump simply does not believe what most mainstream economists believe, and that is that tariffs are inflationary and the costs will be passed along to consumers in the form of higher prices. I and my Business Week colleagues got to ask Trump about that for a Business Week cover interview we did with Donald Trump back in July at Mar-a-Lago, and he simply disagrees. He said, well, if tariffs were inflationary, we would have had inflation during my first presidency when I imposed rounds of tariffs, and we didn't, and therefore it's not going to be a problem. A lot of people around Trump Publicly, surrogates have taken to echoing those points. So as one of my sources pointed out to me in my current Business Week story, Trump doesn't believe that tariffs are inflationary. Therefore, he's not going to believe it until they're implemented and until we see inflation. So to me, that suggests that we may be in for a rocky ride financially, economically over the next 4 years if Trump is able to go ahead and do what he says he's going to do. And there are fewer guardrails and fewer breaks with Republicans controlling all three branches of Congress now than there were last time around. So I think his theories on tariffs and everything else may get a real test run.
I also do wonder, Josh, do you think Donald Trump thinks about his legacy? 2 assassination attempts, one that we, obviously more serious, it seems, certainly than the other one. But I do wonder if he's an older man, right? We all get older. We start to think about kind of our life's impact. Is this your understanding of him? You think he's thinking about that in the second term?
I'll say this. I'll say that, he and I have never had that discussion, but from everything I've seen from him, from everything I've heard from people around him, Trump tends to live in the here and now. I mean, he is responsive to the cable chyrons that he sees on TV. He's responsive to the closing price in the stock market. He's responsive to, whether or not the Justice Department is going to convict him and send him to jail, which it doesn't look like they are now. Not so much thinking about how his obituary will look in the New York Times. But that being said, look, all presidents like to succeed. I'm sure Trump would like high approval numbers. And a lot of the signifiers that Trump looks to for validation, things like the level of the stock market, the wealth of the United States, the trade deficit, those are all measuring sticks that I think Trump is going to use to measure his own performance. And we'll have to see if he can get those boosted along the lines that I know he wants to, based on the policies that he said he's going to pursue, and if he can do it without breaking apart that broad coalition of both Wall Street folks and working class folks that got him elected on November 5th.
Josh, speaking of policies, do you believe that he will actually make good, based on the folks you talked to, of deporting millions of people who are here illegally on day one?
He's certainly shown every sign that he intends to do that, both from the people he's put in top-level positions, people like Stephen Miller and Tom Homans, that would lead that effort, to some of the comments he's made more recently about being willing to deputize U.S. law enforcement to help carry out this deportation. So everything we've seen so far suggests that, yes, Trump is very serious about that and intends to pursue it as president.
Hey, just 30 seconds here to wrap up, and you wrap up your piece. I mean, Donald Trump may also just be lucky in terms of timing, right? Policies put in place by the Biden administration, he may reap the benefits of. Just quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that galls so many Biden people and so many Democratic sources is, look at the economy Joe Biden has bequeathed Donald Trump. We have inflation coming down. The stock market is at record highs. We have all these new jobs in manufacturing, factories being built all across the country with money that Biden really helped put in place. And now Donald Trump is about to take over as president and reap the political benefits and credit for all of those things. Great timing for Donald Trump. Not so great timing for Joe Biden.
It's always about timing, isn't it? All right, Josh Green, good stuff. Thank you, thank you. Bloomberg Business Week national correspondent. Check out his story on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com/businessweek. Coming up, healthcare in America. What impact might RFK Jr. mean when it comes to healthcare in America?
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the Dow lower, the S&P, NASDAQ. They are both advancing. S&P up 16 right now, up 0.3%. 58.87. Stocks are rebounding after last week's slide. Treasury stabilized after 10-year yields approached 4.5%. And traders continue to keep a close eye on news around President-elect Donald Trump's administration. So again, the S&P up 0.3, the Dow down 0.2%, NASDAQ up 74, up by about 0.4%. 10-year 4.41%, the 2-year 4.28%. Gold up $47 the ounce, up 1.8%, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 3.2%, $69.16 a barrel, and Bitcoin up 0.9%. Just below 90,000 now at 89,922 on Bitcoin. NVIDIA, which reports results this week, lower after the information reported that the chip giant has asked its suppliers to change the design of the server racks for its new Blackwell graphics processing unit because of an overheating problem. NVIDIA down 1.7%. And in New York, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority has approved a revised congestion pricing plan for Manhattan that President-elect Donald Trump has threatened to terminate once he takes office. Recapping, S&P up 14, up by about 0.3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Charlie Pellet there with a market and business update. Well, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s selection to serve as President-elect Donald Trump's top health official is prompting questions from policy watchers over how the pick will handle the range of health and really key health policies that would fall under his purview.
He's an environmental lawyer and vocal vaccine skeptic. He's publicly taken positions against food additives and immunization recommendations. But the nominee for Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has been relatively quiet on many of the other issues he would oversee, while leading 13 supporting agencies and more than 80,000 federal employees. So let's get to the interview. We got with us Dr. Paul Offit, director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, who joins us from Philadelphia. Doctor, good to have you with us. How might RFK Jr. impact healthcare, food, medical research, and more here in the U.S.?
He's a virulent anti-vaccine activist. He's a science denialist, and he's a conspiracy theorist. This is not the kind of person you want to head health agencies. I mean, he has said that no vaccine is a benefit. He has said that the polio vaccine killed more people than it ever saved. He thinks that HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, is not the cause of AIDS. He's an AIDS denialist. He thinks we should drink raw milk, which will put us once again in a position of risking things like Campylobacter and E. coli and Salmonella. He thinks that the SARS virus was created in a laboratory and specifically designed to spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese and target whites and blacks. I mean, this is the man you want to head health agencies? I don't think so.
What scares you the most?
Well, what scares me the most is that he now has a bigger platform to be anti-vaccine. So, I mean, he's always had a platform owing to the famous name, but now that he's even considered for this position gives him a certain level of credibility, which he certainly doesn't deserve. Let's suppose you have a vaccine that is submitted to the FDA for licensure, and it's excellent, and it's better than what we've had. I think, you know, say I'm on the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee. Let's say that we recommend licensure, and then the FDA considers that recommendation and agrees. He could say, no, I think there needs to be more study. Similarly, he could try and strip away the CDC's capacity to recommend vaccines. He could take the advisory committees to both those agencies, FDA and CDC, and try and stock it with people who are similarly like-minded science denialists such as himself. I don't understand this. And when he talks about, for example, something that makes sense, which is trying to make our country healthier, decrease obesity, decrease type 2 diabetes, and the consequences of those disorders, such as strokes and heart attacks, I'm all for that. Great idea. But there are a lot of people out there who could do that job much better than he can, given his science denialism.
Dr. Offit, on vaccines specifically, Robert F. Kennedy, as you know, has often been referred to as a vaccine skeptic. You call yourself a vaccine skeptic. What's the difference?
Right. A skeptic is somebody who says, prove it to me. Show me you're right. So when we sit around the table at the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee and consider vaccines, as we did for the COVID vaccines, for example, in December of 2020, show us the data, prove that it's effective, prove that it's safe, so that we can then recommend it in good conscience. That's skepticism. Skepticism is healthy. He's a cynic. He's a vaccine cynic. He doesn't believe the data. He thinks that there are dark, evil forces working behind the scenes that are misrepresenting data. What he doesn't realize is that there is no hiding. Even if pharmaceutical company misrepresented data on safety or efficacy, that will soon be found out, because there are post-marketing studies like that can be done by the Vaccine Safety Data Link, where you'll know if there's a problem immediately. There is no hiding. So his whole premise is wrong.
One thing that I've been wondering is, how different are we than other developed countries or other wealthy countries when it comes to vaccine schedules, Doctor? Do we do things differently than other countries around the world?
We tend to recommend more vaccines than most other countries. So, for example, the chickenpox vaccine, which came onto the market in 1995, is not used in a number of developed world countries. They're willing to have children suffer chickenpox. In this country, obviously, there would be millions of cases of chickenpox a year, and there'd be about 75 to 100 people who would die of chickenpox, and there would be tens of thousands of hospitalizations. So we thought that was worth eliminating, but not all countries felt the same way.
Other than that, though, there aren't big differences?
No. For the most part, the developed world doesn't like children to get sick.
So if you did end up overseeing the CDC and changing the recommendations, we'd be an outlier in this country based on some of the recommendations that he could make.
Right. No, I think his fanatical anti-vaccine activism has already scared people. I mean, if you look, for example, over the last few years, our number of cases of measles have increased dramatically. Last year, we had 3,000 cases of pertussis or whooping cough. This year, we have 17,000. We've had more than 200 children less than 18 years of age die of influenza over the past year. That's a high number. So you're already seeing an erosion in trust, already seeing an erosion in vaccine rates among kindergartens, and as a consequence, you're seeing an increase in infectious diseases that are preventable. It's unconscionable.
I have to say, I have talked with colleagues and friends and associates who have autistic children, now adults, and who are open to the idea that maybe vaccines cause this problem. So, there is, I've had these discussions. I guess what I wonder about, are we going to maybe, depending on what comes out, if RFK is indeed our next top health voice here in the administration, will that potentially lead to maybe some kind of ruling or mandate that comes down that says, we don't believe in vaccines, and then are they not covered by insurance? How does this potentially play out?